Chapter 1944. Damn it! Inji's eyes widened in anger as a strong killing intent surged in her heart. She couldn't help but curse. Reckless human reptile. I didn't want to waste time, so I spared your life. I didn't expect you to take the initiative to ask for death. Since that's the case, I'll fulfill your wish. Go to hell. At the same time, she formed a seal with both hands and manipulated the disc array under her feet to activate the array to attack. Boom! The flying boat suddenly released a dazzling blood light that condensed into 3 huge light pillars that blasted towards the white-robed youth. The 3 blood-colored light pillars that were hundreds of meters long cut through the dark night sky and instantly drowned the white-robed youth's figure. There was no loud explosion, nor was there a tragic scene of flesh and blood splattering everywhere. The 3 light pillars flew out hundreds of miles before dissipating in the night sky. The sea of clouds in front of the flying boat became empty. Inji's lips curled into a disdainful sneer as she muttered, "Overconfident worm, what a mantis trying to stop a chariot." However, just as her voice fell, the flying boat suddenly shook. Boom boom boom. In the night sky from all directions, powerful heaven and earth divine power surged and ruthlessly crushed the flying boat, making a series of dull sounds. The flying boat shook more and more violently, the outer hull of the boat was constantly caved in and cracks appeared. Even the mast and dark north flag at the bow of the boat were crushed inch by inch and scattered into pieces. The sudden upheaval made Inji full of shock. She tried her best to control the array to get the flying boat out of the predicament. The array spun at high speed as the flying boat burst out with all its power and lit up with a brilliant purple light. However, the formless energy from all directions was simply all-pervasive, so powerful that it was difficult to resist. The flying boat violently struggled for dozens of times but still couldn't get out. Several demon monarchs in the secret chamber were alarmed and came to Inji's side to ask her what happened. "Inji, what's going on? What happened? Could it be the broken soul cliff? Inji, didn't the 7 demon monarchs ask you to fly over the broken soul cliff?" Everyone anxiously questioned her. She was also at a loss as she shook her head and said, I also don't know what's going on. Earlier, I saw a white-robed young man in the sea of clouds ahead. Could it be that he's still alive? The 7 demon lords, whose aura was the coldest and most dignified, immediately understood. They said in a sinister tone, "Prepare to meet the enemy. We have been ambushed." Following his order, the demon lords no longer hesitated. They all turned and rushed out of the secret room, leaving the flying ship. Inji was the only one left in the secret chamber. She was trying her best to control the disc array to resist the boundless suppressive force. At the same time, the blood god's clones and demon warriors were also awakened by the huge noise. Countless people opened the doors of their secret rooms and asked each other about the situation. The violent and bloodthirsty blood god scions were even more restless as they released monstrous killing intent. Inside the flying boat, it was a scene of panic. Swish! Swish! After several flashes of bloody light, the 7 demon monarchs appeared in the gloomy sky with 4 demon monarchs. The 5 experts were very vigilant. They spread out and surrounded the flying boat, taking out their Dharma treasures and weapons. Everyone endured the suppression of the invisible force and released their divine senses to explore the surrounding situation, looking for the culprit. However, what puzzled everyone was that the surrounding area was empty. There was not even a shadow of a ghost. The white-robed youth that Inji mentioned was also nowhere to be seen. Could it be that Inji saw wrongly? Yes. Which human worm dares to stop us? Are they tired of living? What a powerful force. It is everywhere. It is like the power of an array. This should be the power of the Broken Soul Cliff. Legend has it that the bottom of the Broken Soul Cliff is the abyss of death. Anyone who passes by here will be swallowed. The demon lords were all filled with doubt as they secretly discussed with each other. Only the 7 demon lords remained silent and calm. He looked at the broken soul cliff below and frowned as he looked around. He vaguely felt that Inji saw the white-robed youth. It was probably not an illusion. The invisible force suppressing the flying ship was probably related to the white-robed youth. If that is the case, the white-robed youth must be a powerful enemy with terrifying strength. However, why would he dare to stay at the broken soul cliff? How did he know that we would fly past here and set up an ambush here in advance? Is this a coincidence, or is there a conspiracy? The 7 demon lords frowned and pondered. The more he thought, the more alarmed he felt. However, before he could think carefully, there was a sudden change behind him. Gotcha! Gotcha! The flying ship's defensive power reached its limit and finally could not hold on. The purple light shield collapsed on the spot. The flying ship also suddenly shattered, making a loud noise. In just 2 short breaths, the huge flying ship was crushed into pieces and crumpled into a pile of scrap metal. Countless fragments burst out and scattered from the sky. The thousands of demon race warriors hidden in the flying ship and hundreds of blood gods' illusions also flew out. The powerful divine power of heaven and earth crushed many demon race warriors on the spot. Their corpses scattered in the night sky. The demon race warriors who were lucky enough not to die also could not escape this area. They joined forces to resist the suppressive force and tenaciously held on. However, their strength was too weak. More and more people died suddenly and were crushed into powder. Only those blood gods' illusions could still resist the suppressive force. They roared wildly in the night sky and did their best to resist. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Several rays of light flashed. Inji and the 4 demon lords flew out from the crowd and quickly met up with the 7 demon lords. The 10 demon monarchs gathered together and joined hands to cast a spell to form a light barrier that protected everyone. Everyone looked at the 7 demon lords and hurriedly asked, 7 demon lords, what do we do now? The flying ship has been destroyed. The warriors have no place to hide. Their lives are at stake. The 7 demon lords glanced at the crowd not far away. Seeing the demon race warriors dying tragically, a look of determination flashed across his eyes. We don't know the whole story yet. We must immediately take the blood gods' illusions and leave Broken Soul Cliff. As for those warriors, save as many as you can. Give up on those you can't. The demon lords were silent. Their expressions were filled with grief and indignation. However, they knew that the 7 demon lords' actions were understandable. After all, the blood gods' illusions were the most precious and powerful killing weapons. The demon lords made up their minds and hurriedly scattered to save the blood gods' illusions. Only the 7 demon lords, Inji, and the dwarf elder were left to support the defensive light shield. The demon lords moved quickly and saved batch after batch of blood gods' illusions. They brought them back to the defensive light shield. At this moment, a giant sword as black as ink suddenly flew over from the night sky. Whoosh! When it got close to the defensive light shield, the mysterious giant sword released a dazzling golden light and an unstoppable power. Kaboom! With a dull explosion, the defensive light barrier formed by the combined efforts of the demon lords shattered on the spot. Chapter 1945. The 7 demon lords, Inji, and the rest were sent flying 10,000 feet away by the violent impact. Everyone was scattered in the night sky, and they were all either lightly or heavily injured. At the same time, the formless heaven and earth divine power suddenly doubled in strength. The demon lords' bodies were distorted from the suppression, and their flying speed became extremely slow. All of them were in a predicament. As for the 100-foot-long sword of burial of heaven, it was emitting a dazzling golden light as it wantonly slaughtered the demon warriors. Swoosh! 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 The gigantic sword slashed out a sword beam that blotted out the sky, slashing into the chaotic crowd. Bam! 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 Most of the demon warriors were only at the second or third level of the essence soul realm. In the demon tribes or the three divine kingdoms, this kind of strength was indeed elite warriors. But they encountered the sword of burial of heaven, and only death awaited them. And those demon lords and blood gods could not even protect themselves, much less help them. The sword of burial of heaven went on a killing spree in the crowd. Blood splattered everywhere it passed, as though it had entered a no-man's land, sweeping everything before it. 15 minutes later, the sword of burial of heaven slaughtered more than 600 demon warriors. There were also more than 300 demon warriors that were crushed to pulp by the formless force, dying on the spot. Countless pieces of flesh and purple demon blood splattered in the night sky, emitting a thick stench of blood. And at this moment, the 10 demon lords rallied and gathered together. They led more than 100 blood gods and tried their best to flee far away from Broken Soul Cliff. Seeing this, the sword of burial of heaven immediately gave chase, thrusting out sword beams to prevent the demon warriors from escaping. Ji Tianqing's cold bellow resounded in the world. Heaven and earth incarnation, dragon elephant subduing demons. Burial of heaven, lend me a hand and send these demons to hell. Without a doubt, Ji Tianqing had already heaven and earth incarnation, which was why he could maintain his formless state and support the dragon elephant heavenly seal that spanned 50 kilometers. He was the dragon elephant heavenly seal formation, and this formation was him. As he shouted coldly, he unleashed his full strength, raising the draconic elephant heavenly seal's power by 50%. It was to the extent that he didn't hesitate to absorb the spiritual energy within the heaven-mending pearl in order to increase the power of the great formation. The burial of heaven sword also lit up with a golden light that soared into the sky. It merged with Ji Tianqing and increased the power of the formation. Shwa! The golden light merged into the world and immediately disappeared. The 10 demon monarchs and the blood gods did not dare to relax at all. Instead, their hearts were in their throats. In the next moment, the invisible divine power of heaven and earth suddenly doubled in power. A gigantic golden light shield with a radius of 100 miles suddenly appeared in the night sky. This oval-shaped light shield was filled with mysterious patterns and lines, and the shadows of ancient divine beasts appeared one after another. The 10-mile-long divine dragon shadow and the mountain-sized divine elephant shadow appeared vividly in the light barrier, exuding an aura that could suppress the heavens and the earth. Such a dazzling and magical scene was simply like a miracle. This was the dragon elephant heavenly seal secret technique that Ji Tianqing had used himself as the carrier to cast. The 10 demon monarchs and the 100 blood gods were all enveloped by the formation. Their bodies were suppressed until they were deformed and could not move. As the golden light shield descended, the demon monarchs and the blood gods were also suppressed and fell down the breaking soul cliff. Soon, the demon monarchs and the blood gods fell into the depths of the breaking soul cliff and quickly approached the void net at the bottom of the cliff. The demon monarchs and the blood gods realized that something was wrong. They desperately struggled and roared. They did not know what Ji Tianqing wanted to do. But they knew that if they could not escape in time, they would definitely die. Therefore, the 10 demon monarchs rushed forward without thinking about their own safety and joined forces to cast a forbidden secret technique. Demonic Dragon Sky Explosion. The 10 demon monarchs all burned, and bloody flames emerged from their bodies, connecting to form a blood-red demonic dragon that was dozens of feet long. Everyone's power gathered and suddenly exploded, blasting toward the golden light above their heads. Kaboom! A deep crater was created in the sacred golden light barrier, and a few cracks appeared on it. Seeing this, the 10 demon monarchs were energized and attacked the golden light shield again. Kaboom! Another shattering sound was heard. The pit expanded a little, and the cracks became denser. It looked like it was about to collapse. The 100 blood gods were also encouraged. They gathered together and formed a few giant demons that were thousands of feet tall. They joined forces to attack the golden light shield. The demon monarchs and the blood gods attacked the formation with all their might, which was equivalent to attacking Ji Tianqing. Cracks and craters appeared in the formation, and Ji Tianqing also felt waves of intense pain. He was incomparably furious. Damn it! There are so many demon monarchs and blood gods. It's too difficult for me to kill them all at once. I have to think of another way. He thought angrily and anxiously, and soon he had an idea. Apocalyptic tornado. The golden light formation within a radius of 100 miles immediately spun faster, and rapidly shrank. In the blink of an eye, the golden light array turned into a huge vortex. Swish, swish, swish. The golden vortex within a 50-mile radius spun rapidly and released a dazzling golden light, illuminating the broken soul cliff. A terrifying devouring power exploded from the vortex and crazily pulled the demon monarchs and blood gods. The giant demons formed by the blood gods' illusions were immediately crushed. One by one, the blood gods fell from the giant demons and involuntarily flew to the bottom of the vortex. The bottom of the golden vortex happened to be connected to the invisible void net. The first blood god was thrown out by the golden vortex and entered the invisible void net. Chi, chi, chi. With a faint sound, the blood god's sun that was more than 10 meters tall was cut into pieces by the void net and disappeared without a trace. Then, the second blood god flew out of the golden vortex and rushed into the void net. Another, chi, 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 sounded. This blood god was also cut into pieces by the void net and then swallowed by the void net. Following that, the blood gods' illusions arrived one after another, and they were all thrown into the void net by Ji Tianqing. At first, the 10 demon monarchs and the blood gods didn't know what was going on. They just desperately resisted the power of the apocalyptic tornado. But after 100 breaths, more than 60 blood gods were swallowed by the void net. The remaining blood gods and the 10 demon monarchs finally realized that something was wrong and that there was something strange at the bottom of the cliff. Everyone was filled with fear and anger. They desperately fought back, trying to destroy the golden vortex and escape the broken soul cliff. But it was futile. The golden vortex spun rapidly and unpredictably, and it could repair the cracks and gaps at any time. After 20 breaths, more than 30 surviving demon monarchs were all smashed into the void net. In the golden vortex, only 10 demon monarchs were still stubbornly resisting. Witnessing the death of 1,000 demon race warriors and the disappearance of 100 blood gods, they were in complete despair. Most importantly, they didn't even see the enemy's shadow and lost just like that. Chapter 1946. This batch of improved blood gods was the product of the ancestor Fian Celestial's hard work, and also the hope of North Underworld Mountain. They shouldered a heavy responsibility and carried an extraordinary meaning. It was the 10 demon monarchs' honor and pride to escort this batch of blood gods to the war. But now, before they could even reach the battlefield, the blood gods were all killed just as they reached the broken soul cliff. What was going on? Dying before they could even achieve victory? Who could bear this responsibility? Even if they could escape from the golden vortex and return to North Underworld Mountain, they would definitely be blasted into smithereens by the ancestor Fiend Celestial. No. The ancestor Fiend Celestial did not even need to do anything. The enraged great demon sage would kill them all to vent his anger. Thinking of this, the demon monarchs were filled with grief and despair. Everyone thought that since they were going to die anyway, they might as well fight to the death. Therefore, 3 demon monarchs burned their bodies and souls and self-detonated on the spot. Boom! 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 3 deafening explosions rang out in succession. The 3 demon monarchs all exploded, turning into bloody clouds that soared into the sky, blooming with dazzling bloody light. The power that could destroy heaven and earth was unleashed, indiscriminately sweeping across dozens of miles. Kaboom! The golden vortex could not withstand such terrifying power and was blasted into pieces. Countless shards of golden light scattered in the night sky and soon disappeared. Swoosh! The dragon-elephant heavenly seal array was destroyed, and Ji Tianqing's figure appeared. His body was intact, but his internal organs and soul were severely injured. His face was as pale as paper, and blood was spurting out from his nose and mouth. Even the fluctuations of his soul had become extremely disordered, and his consciousness had become blurry and dizzy. At the same time, the other 7 demon monarchs were also enveloped by the bloody light and were sent flying in all directions. Their injuries were even worse. Their limbs were broken by the power of their companions' self-detonation, and their bodies were drenched in blood. The terrifying shockwave sent them flying in all directions, scattering in the abyss. 4 of the weaker demon monarchs were not only severely injured, but their souls and consciousness were also unconscious. The 7 demon monarchs, Inji, and the dwarf elder were stronger, and their injuries were lighter. Although they were also riddled with wounds and were in a terrible state, they were still able to maintain their consciousness. After being sent flying more than 10 miles away by the shockwave, the 3 of them stabilized themselves and tried their best to fly up the breaking soul cliff. Of course, their injuries were too severe, and they only had about 30% of their strength left. Their flying speed was also extremely slow. At the same time, a 10-meter-long pitch-black sword flew out from the night sky. It was the sword of burial of heaven. Swish! The burial of heaven shone with a resplendent golden light. Like a comet tearing through the night sky, it stabbed at the 4 demon lords at the bottom of the cliff. The 4 demon monarchs were still unconscious, drifting along with the blood-red waves of chi, bobbing up and down. Boom! Blood blossomed like a flower. The sword of burial of heaven pierced through a demon monarch and blasted it into smithereens. Even its soul was annihilated. Bang bang! The sword of the burial of heaven turned around and flew to the other side, piercing through the bodies of 2 demon lords and exploding with 2 thuds. After the sword light pierced through, the bodies of the 2 demon monarchs also exploded into countless pieces of flesh and blood, scattering in the night sky. The last demon monarch fell rapidly from the night sky, smashing into the void net at the bottom of the cliff. The sword of the burial of heaven was about to pursue, but Ji Tianqing had already woken up. He waved his hand and shot out a sword light. Boom! With another thud, the sword light pierced through the demon monarch's body. That demon monarch was cleaved in 2. Its corpse fell into the void net and was ground into smithereens. Seeing that Ji Tianqing was fine and that his injuries had already stabilized, the sword of the burial of heaven was no longer worried. Swish! It shone with a dazzling golden light, dragging a long golden tail of flame behind it as it flew up the cliff, chasing after the 7 demon monarchs and Ji's group. Ji Tianqing also regained his composure and rushed up like a stream of light. After 3 breaths, the sword of the burial of heaven caught up with the 7 demon monarchs. At this time, the 3 of them had already escaped from the cliff and were above the broken soul cliff. Before the 3 of them could breathe a sigh of relief, the sword of the burial of heaven attacked from behind, thrusting out a dozen giant golden swords. Swish swish swish! Suddenly, the dozen giant golden swords scattered and shrouded the 3 demon monarchs. The 3 of them did not know the secret of the sword of the burial of heaven. They thought that Ji Tianqing was controlling the sacred sword to release a sword technique to attack. Damn bastard! The North Underworld Mountain will never let you go. No matter who you are, the only outcome for going against the North Underworld Mountain is death. Even if we die here, the warriors of the North Underworld Mountain will avenge us. The 7 demon monarchs, Ji, and the dwarf elder all let out roars of grief and indignation. The 3 of them used all their strength and used their trump cards to launch a counterattack. The 7 demon monarchs took out a ghastly myriad demon's banner. He cast a spell to control the myriad demon's banner to release a purple light that wrapped around his body. Ji also took out a set of white bone armor that fit perfectly with her body. The dwarf elder swung his pair of battle axes with all his might and slashed at the giant golden swords. Bam bam bam! A deafening explosion resounded through the clouds. The giant golden swords shattered into pieces and scattered in the night sky. The sword of the burial of heaven's attack was neutralized by the three of them just like that. The seven demon monarchs' myriad demons banner had a few holes in it, and there were a few more bloody holes on his body. Inji's white bone armor was shattered, and one of her left legs was chopped off. One of the dwarf elders' battle axes was chopped off, and the other one was full of holes. There was also a bull-sized bloody hole in his chest. The three of them did not dare to continue fighting. They flew across the sky and fled towards the north. The sword of the burial of heaven did not hesitate and immediately chased after them. At this moment, Ji Tianqing also arrived at the scene. He reached out his right hand and grabbed the sword of the burial of heaven in his palm. He chased after the demon monarchs like a shooting star and stabbed with his sword. Piercing sword. A dot of cold light suddenly appeared, flashing in the night sky. In the next moment, the cold light flew across the night sky and stabbed into the dwarf elder's back before exploding. Boom! Cold light blossomed, like a huge mushroom cloud rising into the sky, illuminating the night sky within 100 miles. The dwarf elder was blown to smithereens, and his divine soul was also shattered. He died on the spot. The sword of the burial of heaven unleashed a devouring power and swallowed the fragments of the dwarf elder's divine soul. After taking care of the dwarf elder, Ji Tianqing chased after Ji. Big Dipper sword. Ji Tianqing shouted and stabbed with the sword of the burial of heaven. 7 dazzling cold lights were shot out. The 7 sword lights were as dazzling as 7 shooting stars and hit Ji in an instant. Bam bam bam. Ji followed in the dwarf elder's footsteps. Her body and divine soul were shattered into pieces and scattered in the night sky. The 7th demon monarch was the only one left. He was still running for his life and had already fled for more than 10 miles. Ji Tianqing chased after him with a cold face. When he was still 3,000 feet away, he waved his hand and shot out a 5-colored light beam. 5-colored divine thunder. This 100-foot-long divine thunder beam was formed by 4 types of divine thunder and the silver divine fire of the stars. It was extremely powerful. Boom! A loud, dull sound exploded in the night sky. The 7th demon monarch was also smashed into pieces. Chapter 1947. The long night finally passed. After dawn, a ray of light appeared on the horizon. A new day was about to arrive. On the peak of Breaking Soul Cliff, Ji Tianqing sat cross-legged on a large millstone. His hands were crossed on his knees, and he was circulating his energy with his eyes closed, silently healing his injuries. The sword of burial of heaven floated in the sky, monitoring the movements around him, protecting him, and keeping watch. When the sun rose and scattered its warm rays, Ji Tianqing finally finished healing his injuries. His physical body was incomparably strong, and his self-healing ability had reached an abnormal level. After a few hours of recuperation, his injuries had already recovered by 70%, and he was no longer in any danger. Only the injuries to his spirit were more troublesome. Even if he took pills to heal his spirit, he would not be able to recover in a short period of time. Phew! Ji Tianqing opened his eyes and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He was full of energy once more. Although I suffered heavy injuries from last night's battle, fortunately, I succeeded. That group of blood gods and 10 demon monarchs were all killed by me. The ancestral god-fiend scheme has been destroyed, and the pressure on the northern frontier has been greatly reduced. Ji Tianqing muttered to himself as a gratified smile appeared on his face. At this time, the sword of burial of heaven flew to his side and reminded him, "Your injuries have recovered. Shall we go down and take a look?" Ji Tianqing nodded and reached out to grab the sword of burial of heaven before flying down Breaking Soul Cliff. As he descended, he communicated with the sword of burial of heaven. "It's strange. We passed by this place many times over 1,000 years ago, and it was just an ordinary mountain range. How did it become the infamous Breaking Soul Cliff? Why did a void net appear at the bottom of the cliff? The Sword of Burial of Heaven was silent for a moment before replying in a low voice, 1,000 years is a short time for us, but it's a long time for ordinary people. Such a long time is enough for many things and unforeseen events to happen. The current Shinwu continent is no longer the Shinwu continent that we were familiar with. Perhaps something happened here in the past 1,000 years that caused the void cracks that are difficult to heal, and that's why the void net appeared. Ji Tianqing furrowed his eyebrows and thought for a moment. Then, he nodded and said, "That's highly likely. Only a spatial crack can release such powerful void strength." Soon, Ji Tianqing arrived at the bottom of the cliff. His figure was swallowed by the darkness. He stopped near the void net and said with a solemn expression, "If the burial of heaven was only a void net, I would be able to pass through it with my secret arts. But we don't know what lies beneath the void net, or what dangers lie beneath it." Before he could finish, Burial of Heaven understood what he meant. After all, the two of them were old partners with incomparable chemistry. "It's fine, I'll escort you in." Following the voice of the Burial of Heaven, the Burial of Heaven released a black light that enveloped Ji Tianqing. Shwa! Ji Tianqing was swallowed into the Burial of Heaven and stayed in the Sword's world. Then, the Burial of Heaven lit up with a layer of mysterious black light and flew towards the void net at a leisurely pace. Chi. As soon as the Burial of Heaven came into contact with the void net, it was cut by dozens of invisible void strength, emitting a series of soft sounds. Every void strength was like an unparalleled sharp knife, madly strangling the Burial of Heaven. However, the Burial of Heaven was protected by a layer of black light. The void strength cut the layer of black light into pieces, but it couldn't hurt the Burial of Heaven. Shwa! With a flash of light, the Burial of Heaven drilled into the void net and disappeared into the darkness. In the next moment, the Burial of Heaven passed through the void net, as if crossing a layer of alternate space, and arrived in a dark space. Without the void strength cutting it, it only felt that the pressure on it was greatly reduced, and it became much more relaxed. Shwa! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianqing flew out of the Burial of Heaven and landed in the dark space. He held the Burial of Heaven in his hand and looked around vigilantly. After seeing the surroundings clearly, his body suddenly trembled, and he frowned. He saw that under his feet was a dark void. This was a vacuum zone, with nothing, no air, and no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. In front of him was a boundless starry sky, and in the depths of the distant starry sky, there were dense dots of light, flickering with a faint silver light. Those were the thousands of stars in the universe. And in the void behind him, there was an incomparably huge star that was beyond imagination. This superstar was a riot of colors. Most of the surface of the star was covered in blue, followed by green and earthy colors. However, the surface of the star was covered in a thick layer of golden light, making it impossible to see the situation on the surface of the star. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing fell silent, and his face was filled with memories. After a long time, he said with emotion, In my previous life, after I reached the martial sage realm, I was able to leave the five elements world for a short time and see the magnificent starry sky. I didn't expect that in this life, I would accidentally come to the void when I was in the tribulation realm. The Burial of Heaven also said in a low voice, After more than 1,000 years, I finally entered the universe's starry sky and saw the appearance of the five elements world. Without a doubt, this super-huge star was the world that Ji Tianqing was in, the five elements world. 60% of the surface of the star was covered in blue. Ji Tianqing knew that it was the various oceans of the five elements world, which were boundless and vast. Those floating in the blue ocean, the yellow and green areas were continents and islands. And the mysterious golden light that enveloped the entire star was the God Seal. Only Ji Tianqing knew that because of the existence of the God Seal, the martial gods of the five elements world were unable to ascend to the upper realm. This was the biggest secret of the five elements world. Although Ji Tianqing was very far from the five elements world, at least 10 million miles away. But this distance was still too close. After all, the five elements world was too vast, with a diameter of more than 10 billion miles. Ji Tianqing could only see a corner of the five elements world and could not see the whole picture. Unless, one day, he recovered the God realm and could travel the starry sky and enter the depths of the starry sky. At that time, he would be far enough from the five elements world to be able to see the true appearance of this star. Ji Tianqing stared at the five-element star and said with a complicated tone, being in the five elements world, you will never know the vastness of the world and the vastness of heaven and earth. At this moment, standing in the starry sky and looking at the entire star, you will know the mystery of the five elements world. The process of martial arts cultivation is to strengthen one's own strength and to explore and understand heaven and earth. Countless martial arts geniuses and peerless powerhouses dream of leaving the five elements world and entering the void to see the magnificent starry sky with their own eyes. But from ancient times until now, among the hundreds of millions of martial arts powerhouses, how many have been able to realize their dreams? Burial of Heaven also expressed his agreement and said in a leisurely tone, "That's right. Only by reaching the God realm can one have the chance to travel the starry sky and cross the star field." Chapter 1948. Ji Tianqing sighed with emotion for a while before his complicated emotions calmed down. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that not far from the five elements world, there was a silver light flickering in the void. The silver light in the void must be the radiance of the stars. But that place is close to the five elements world, how can there be stars? Ji Tianqing frowned, revealing a look of deep confusion. The burial of heaven also sensed that something was wrong and reminded, just now, we passed through the void web and a spatial crack to arrive in the void. The place where the silver light shone seems to be the exit of the five elements world. It must be related to the spatial crack. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Let's go and take a look." With that, he entered the burial of heaven and stayed in the sword's world. The burial of heaven shone with a golden light, like a meteor streaking across the void, flying towards the silver light. Although Ji Tianqing could stay in the void, he could not maintain it for too long. If he flew for millions of miles, his magic power would not be able to sustain it, and there would be unpredictable dangers. Only the burial of heaven could travel unimpeded in the void. Although the distance between Ji Tianqing and the silver light did not seem to be far, the distance between Ji Tianqing and the silver light was not far. But the burial of heaven flew for 10 days straight and only covered a third of the distance. The distance of millions of miles was very short in the void, not worth mentioning at all. But for a martial saint, it would take a month of continuous flying to reach it. Therefore, martial saints could move in the void, but they could not travel in the void, let alone reach another star. Only martial gods had the qualifications and possibility to do so. Unknowingly, 30 days passed. The burial of heaven finally crossed the distance of millions of miles and arrived at the place where the silver light shone. This place was extremely close to the five elements world. In another few tens of thousands of miles, they would reach the golden seal. When they arrived near the silver light, the burial of heaven stopped in the void, and Ji Tianqing flew out of the sword. He focused his eyes and saw the silver light clearly. It was a great path condensed from starlight, and it was 5 kilometers wide and tens of thousands of kilometers long. One end of this mysterious starlight path was connected to the void, and the other end was connected to a gigantic black rock. The black rock was 10,000 miles long and was diamond-shaped. It was like a sharp knife that pierced through the golden light seal and stabbed into the five elements world. If one were to say that the super-huge five elements world was a big watermelon, that huge black rock was like a pebble stuck on a watermelon. After seeing this scene clearly, Ji Tianqing suddenly came to a realization and revealed a look of deep surprise. "I see," No wonder there was a void net at the bottom of the broken soul cliff and a spatial crack. Who would have thought that it was this black stone that pierced through the golden light seal and pierced into the five elements world, causing the space crack that could not be healed? Burial of Heaven said solemnly, "This black stone looks very mysterious. It must have come from the depths of the starry sky and collided with the five elements world. If I'm not wrong, that is not an ordinary stone, but a meteorite formed by the shattering of a star." Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and shook his head gently. "Your guess is not completely correct. The meteorite formed by the shattering of a star will burn and decompose when it passes through the void. In the end, it will fall into the five elements world. The meteorite must be very small. It is very rare for it to be the size of a house. This stone is 10,000 miles long, so it is definitely not a meteorite. It is very likely to be a star core." Star core. Burial of Heaven was stunned for a moment and said in shock, "The source and crystal of the star power." "That's right." Ji Tianqing nodded and said in a serious tone, "You should not forget that when we were fighting in the star field, I refined 18 stars and made them into a string of heavenly star chains. A star with a radius of 10 billion miles was refined to the extreme by me, and the star core was only 10,000 miles in size. I used a supreme divine art to seal the 10,000 miles long star core into a bead." Burial of Heaven responded and said in surprise, "I vaguely remember this. That is indeed the case. According to what you said, this black stone inserted in the five elements world is the star core of a great world." "It is very likely." Ji Tianqing nodded seriously and said, "Let's go and take a look." Then, he held the sword of Burial of Heaven and stepped onto the starlight ancient path, walking towards the huge black stone. The starlight ancient path had a history of thousands of years. The edges were already broken and full of cracks. After entering the starlight ancient path, Ji Tianqing felt the pressure on him decrease greatly. A vast amount of star power crazily rushed into his body and was quickly devoured and refined by him. The starlight ancient path was tens of thousands of miles long. He flew as fast as lightning, but it still took him 4 hours to reach the end of the starlight ancient path. Swoosh! After stepping onto the pitch-black star core, Ji Tianqing clearly felt that the star core contained a mysterious and invisible power. The surface of the star core was bumpy, full of cracks and craters. Ji Tianqing observed carefully and found that these were the traces of a great battle. He couldn't help but wonder which star this star core came from and which great world it was from. 1 hour later, he came to the center of the star core and saw a wide canyon in front of him. Walking to the end of the canyon, Shi Yan saw countless rocks piled up on the ground in front of him, covering a wide cave entrance. Ji Tianqing released his soul consciousness to check. After making sure that there was no aura of life in the canyon and the cave entrance, he stepped into the cave. Inside the pitch-black cave, there was a straight and wide passageway. It was obvious that it was man-made. The walls on both sides of the passage were carved with many mysterious and ancient drawings and strange alien languages. Ji Tianqing slowed down and observed the drawings and words on both sides of the passage. After walking for about 300 miles, he gradually recognized the words on the walls and understood many things. It seems that this star core is the illusory spirit world of the illusory spirit race. However, something happened to the illusory spirit star and it was destroyed by the great battle of the gods. That's why it fell in the starry sky. In the past, he had traveled across countless star fields and seen the human nature of millions of worlds. He knew very well that the billions of worlds in the universe were changing and their strength was changing every day. Every day, old worlds were destroyed, new stars were born, and new races were born. The vastness of the universe was beyond the imagination of ordinary people. The illusory spirit world was just a relatively ordinary great world among the billions of worlds. Burial of Heaven heard Shi Yan's words and was immediately interested. He asked through voice transmission, "Illusory spirit world? It sounds strange. We didn't come in contact with it back then, did we? Of course not. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, from the records left in the star core, the illusory spirit world is in a very distant star field. We have never been there. What's interesting is that the illusory spirit race is one of the ancient races and a noble race with racial talents. Oh. What do you mean? Burial of Heaven was more and more curious. He asked through voice transmission, are they very powerful? Ji Tianqing showed a playful smile and said, no one knows if they are powerful or not. Chapter 1949. Back then, Kenshin had traversed countless galaxies and seen countless worlds and races. His knowledge was extensive, and he could draw parallels. That was why he could recognize the words and patterns of the illusory spirit race. Ji Tianqing was interested in the unfamiliar illusory spirit race. However, he knew that the illusory spirit world had been destroyed, and only a broken star core was left, which had crashed into the five elements world. Even if there was an illusory spirit race hidden in the star core, they must be dead now. He did not expect to meet an illusory spirit race member in the star core. He just wanted to explore the situation inside the star core. He walked along the pitch-black passageway for another 100 miles before he reached the end. In front of him was a huge stone door, which was about 100 feet tall and 100 feet wide. The stone door was dark and emitted a cold light. Its surface was engraved with strange patterns. At first glance, the densely packed patterns looked like hundreds of blooming flowers. However, Ji Tianqing stared at the stone door and observed it carefully. Soon, he found some clues. The patterns on the stone door do not depict flowers. They look more like the brains or souls of the illusory spirit race members. Those patterns should be the totem of the illusory spirit race's faith. The illusory spirit race has a powerful soul talent, so they believe that the brain and soul are the most magical power with endless possibilities. Ji Tianqing stared at the stone door with shining eyes, observing and analyzing. There are so many soul patterns engraved on this stone door. It must be an extremely well-guarded forbidden area. Burial of Heaven also agreed and said solemnly, the star core crossed the void and flew for an unknown distance before it crashed into the five elements world. The star core became incomplete and suffered such a strong impact, but this stone door is still intact. It's incredible. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, the material of this stone door is very special. I'm afraid it's not inferior to a divine weapon. Of course, it won't be damaged so easily. It seems that the stone door was originally sealed by a formation, but now the formation has been destroyed. The destruction of the world, the star core turned into a meteor and fell into the void. After suffering such a destructive impact, even a divine-level formation would not be spared, right? Let me try this stone door. Burial of Heaven flew out, shining with a dazzling golden light and emitting an unparalleled sharp aura, and stabbed at the black stone door. Ding! A crisp sound of metal clashing was heard, and dazzling silver sparks splashed on the stone door. The golden sword light was shattered into pieces, and the Heaven Burier sword was also fiercely bounced back, flying 1,000 feet away. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing couldn't help but chuckle. I already said that the material of this stone door is comparable to a divine artifact. Why don't you believe me? Swoosh! The buried Heaven sword flew back to his side and said in a low voice, in the future, if I want to restore myself to a divine artifact, I can use this stone gate as a material. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, no problem. I'll get it for you when the time comes. Then, he walked of Heaven's world, raised of Heaven. Although this stone gate is still in good condition, the formation on the stone gate has been destroyed. At least we don't have to think about how to break the formation. We just need to push this stone door open. As he spoke, dazzling golden light surged from of Heaven's palms, condensing into two giant golden palms. He slammed them toward the stone door. Bang! The giant golden palms slammed into the stone door, creating a dull sound that reverberated in the dark passage. However, the giant golden palms were shaken to the point of exploding. The black stone door shook several dozen times, and a large cloud of dust fell, but it did not even open a crack. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing frowned and muttered, "The stone door is only 300 meters tall, but its weight is so terrifying. It's far heavier than a 10,000-meter tall mountain." Clearly, this stone door was heavier than a 10,000-meter tall mountain. It was far beyond his expectations. His strength alone was not enough to push open the stone door. He could only work with Burial of Heaven. "Burial of Heaven, lend me a hand." As he spoke, Ji Tianqing's body lit up with golden light. His body expanded rapidly, turning into a 300-meter tall giant. Burial of Heaven also lit up with golden light and flew into his body, becoming one with him. Suddenly, the 300-meter tall Ji Tianqing's strength increased by several times. His whole body exuded a heavy and majestic aura. Once again, he channeled his energy and slowly stretched out his huge palms. He pressed them against the black stone door and pushed it forward with all his strength. The black stone door immediately trembled and made a dull rumbling sound. Dust and gravel scattered everywhere. As Ji Tianqing released even more strength, the stone door shook even more violently. Crack! Something broke, and a crisp sound rang out. The stone door suddenly opened a crack and slowly opened inwards. Ji Tianqing was shocked and pushed the stone door even harder. Crack, 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 with a series of crisp sounds, the stone door finally opened more than half. Only then did Ji Tianqing stop. The golden light around his body faded, and he quickly returned to his original appearance. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, he returned to his original appearance. Holding the Burial of Heaven, he stepped through the door. The ground under the stone door was uneven and covered with fine black stones. It was these black stones that had blocked the stone door, making it difficult for Ji Tianqing to move. He passed through the wide door and entered a dark open space. It was pitch black all around. It was very spacious, and the air was filled with a cold and deathly still aura. Ji Tianqing waved his right hand and threw the Burial of Heaven out. The Burial of Heaven flew 5 kilometers away and floated in the air, shining with a dazzling golden light. The darkness within a few dozen kilometers was immediately dispelled. Ji Tianqing looked around. After seeing the scene around him, he was stunned. His face was full of shock. He saw that there was a vast open space under his feet. The grayish-brown ground was covered with dust, cracks, and gravel. It seemed to have been through the vicissitudes of time. 5 kilometers in front of him stood an ancient palace that was hundreds of feet tall and thousands of feet wide. The palace was built with black stones. Its shape was a little strange. It was an irregular oval, like a human brain. Even so, Ji Tianqing could still feel a sacred and majestic aura coming from it. There were several other palaces around this ancient palace, and their shapes were also strange. However, those palaces were slightly smaller, and their auras were weaker. Ji Tianqing counted. Including the black stone palace in the middle, there were a total of 7 palaces on this land. The arrangement and shape of each palace were different. Obviously, they had a special meaning. Although the golden light of the Burial of Heaven enveloped the 7 palaces, he could only see their general appearance. The details of each palace were hidden in the shadows and darkness. However, Ji Tianqing could still feel that the 7 palaces were the illusory spirit race's holy land, the most sacred and hidden forbidden area. The illusory spirit world had been destroyed. Chapter 1950. Ji Tianqing stood in place for a while, then stepped on the night sky and flew forward. While flying, he released his divine sense to cover a radius of 100 miles to check the surroundings. The situation was just as he had guessed. This was a cave inside the star core. This giant cave, with a radius of 70 miles, was shaped like a brain, and was naturally formed. The cave was surrounded by pitch-black rock walls, which were extremely hard and could block divine sense and dermic powers. There was only one gap in this natural cave, and it was also the only entrance. It was the black stone gate that was 100 feet tall. After discovering this, Ji Tianqing could not help but sigh. No wonder the illusory spirit clan's belief totem is like a brain. So it's here. I guess the ancestors of the illusory spirit clan found this cave inside the star core and obtained transcendent power or treasures here. That's why the illusory spirit clan has a special soul talent and uses this as their totem. This mysterious cave must be the most sacred treasure of the illusory spirit clan, the source of their power. Ji Tianqing speculated inwardly. He had an innate excitement and anticipation towards exploring the strange culture of a foreign race. Soon, he flew near the black stone palace in the middle. Observing the palace from a close distance, he could see it more clearly. There was a square in front of the palace gate, but the ground had long been covered with gullies. Huge gravel was scattered and covered with a thick layer of dust. Some of the gullies on the ground were caused by collisions and vibrations, while some were caused by fierce battles. It was not difficult for Ji Tianqing to imagine that before the illusory spirit world was destroyed, there must have been turmoil and war in this holy land. He stepped across the broken square and landed on the steps in front of the palace gate. The black stone steps were also twisted and broken, with many gravel scattered and covered with a thick layer of dust. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and released a gust of wind, blowing up the gravel and dust on the ground. He could vaguely see some patterns and lines on the ground, as well as a few fingernail-sized metal fragments. Should be the illusory spirit clan's magical weapons. Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and released a soft green light, trying to pick up the dark brown fragments. However, as soon as the green light came into contact with the metal fragments, the fragments immediately weathered and turned into fine powder. Ji Tianqing was dazed for a moment. Frowning, he murmured, "No matter how broken the magical equipment is, it shouldn't be so easily eroded. Is it because it's been too long?" He walked up dozens of steps and arrived in front of the palace gate. The black stone palace gate had already been shattered into several pieces and collapsed at the entrance of the palace, covering it with a layer of dust. Most of the stone pillars under the eaves of the corridor had also collapsed. The walls of the palace were also covered with cracks. It was a scene of dilapidation and decline. Ji Tianqing stepped over the pile of rubble at the entrance and entered the spacious hall. The floor of the hall was paved with dark golden stone slabs. The stone slab was engraved with decorative patterns and diagrams. Perhaps they were also magnificent and dazzling. Unfortunately, the hall was completely pitch black while the ground was warped, cracked, and covered in dust and rocks. There were many statues in the corners of the hall, but they had long been reduced to rubble. More than half of the 16 thick pillars had also collapsed. Only a few pillars that were full of cracks were still supporting the dome of the hall, which seemed to be on the verge of collapse. There were many gemstones on the dome, and patterns were engraved on the black stone slabs. However, a few huge holes had damaged the dome, making it look like a mess. Ji Tianqing's consciousness covered the hall within a radius of 1,000 feet. Soon, he found dozens of gemstones in the rubble. Unfortunately, the strength of those originally multicolored gems had already been completely exhausted, and they had become dull and lusterless, no different from ordinary stones. Ji Tianqing stepped through the messy ruins and walked into the depths of the hall. The throne and the statue of the divine beast at the head of the hall had collapsed. There were also a few deep cracks on the wall, which seemed to be caused by the slashing of divine weapons. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianqing had explored the entire hall, but he didn't find anything useful. He passed through the secret door at the corner of the hall and entered the side hall. The side hall was smaller and also a scene of dilapidated ruins. Buried in the ruins was a secret chamber, which was where the illusory spirit clan stored their ancient books. Almost all of the ancient books were destroyed. The books made of jade slips and animal skins had been reduced to powder and no longer existed. Ji Tianqing rummaged for a while and dug out a few pages from the rubble. Those pages were made of star-true gold, which hadn't decayed for tens of thousands of years. Unfortunately, a great battle had taken place here, and a few pages of the book had been affected by the battle and were damaged. Ji Tianqing dug them out of the rubble and wiped off the dust on them. The pages reappeared with a faint golden light. After a careful examination, he found that the pages were engraved with densely packed characters in the shape of tadpoles, which looked very strange. Strange. The characters on these pages are obviously different from the Illusory Spirit Clan's characters. Are they the original characters of the Illusory Spirit Clan? Or are they the characters of other worlds or races? Ji Tianqing couldn't figure it out for the time being, so he put the pages into his space ring and carefully put them away. He had a hunch that the ancient books made of star-true gold and kept in the holy land of the Illusory Spirit Clan were not ordinary things. After leaving the side hall, he went to search everywhere in the palace. Whether it was the study, the side hall, the backyard, or the garden, he searched them all carefully. Unfortunately, these places were in a complete mess, and there were dilapidated walls and ruins everywhere. He didn't find any valuable treasures. He didn't even find some fragments of magical treasures. In the end, he used his soul consciousness to search carefully and found a secret passage underground. After passing through the twisted and broken passage, which was mostly blocked by the rubble, he found a secret chamber. The secret chamber was not big, but it was very well hidden and had a strong defense. However, with the destruction of the illusory spirit world, the secret chamber was also seriously damaged. The array in the secret chamber had already dissipated. The surrounding walls were cracked, and the ground was full of rubble. Ji Tianqing walked around the secret chamber and thought that there was nothing valuable here. However, when he was about to turn around and leave, his soul consciousness suddenly detected an extremely weak soul fluctuation in the corner of the secret chamber. He stopped in his tracks and frowned in confusion. How is this possible? He couldn't believe that he could detect a soul fluctuation in such a dilapidated place. Although the soul fluctuation was extremely weak and disappeared in a flash. He was very sure that it was not an illusion. I hope there will be a miracle. Ji Tianqing murmured in a low voice. He turned around and looked at the ruins in the corner. Then, he walked over. He waved his hand and shot out a few rays of golden light, sweeping away the rubble in the corner and clearing an open space. Chapter 1951. It was a round bracelet the size of a fist that lay quietly in the corner of the wall. On the surface, the ancient bracelet looked like it was made of brass and had a faint yellow color. The ancient bracelet was covered in a layer of dust and its surface was filled with scratches. There were even a few obvious gaps. Clearly, this ancient bracelet was also affected by the battle and was damaged. Ji Tianqing used his spirit consciousness to investigate and discovered that the ancient bracelet did not have the aura of a Dharma treasure or the energy fluctuation of a divine weapon. No matter how he looked at it, it was a very ordinary bracelet. It was like an accessory worn by mortals and could not even be considered as a dharmic weapon. However, such an ancient bronze bracelet had survived until now in the ruins where everything was destroyed. Ji Tianqing was certain that this mysterious ancient bronze bracelet was definitely not an ordinary item. It was just that he could not see through the mysteries of the ancient bronze bracelet at the moment. What's more, that weak soul fluctuation came from the ancient bronze bracelet. This made him suspect that there might be a powerful spirit hidden within the ancient bronze bracelet. Therefore, he waved his hand and released a gentle green light that enveloped the ancient bronze bracelet. Thankfully, the ancient bronze bracelet was not weathered and was still intact. Ji Tianqing picked up the ancient bronze bracelet and observed it carefully in his palm. The outer ring of the ancient bronze bracelet was extremely rough and filled with scratches and gaps. However, the inner ring of the ancient bronze bracelet was smooth and there was a string of ancient words carved on it. Ji Tianqing took a closer look and realized that it was a few words of the illusory spirit race. Ancient God. Mi Ji. Star fixing ring. Ji Tianqing muttered softly and frowned in confusion. Ancient God. Mi Ji. Star fixing ring. Could this really be a divine weapon? But why don't I have the aura of a divine weapon? He was still puzzled. What did these words mean? Was it the star-fixing ring of the ancient god Mi? Or was it the star-fixing ring of the ancient god Mi Ji? More importantly, he was the one who identified and deduced the 7 words of the illusory spirit race and might not be correct. Just as he was pondering, another soul fluctuation flashed through the ancient bronze bracelet. This time, Ji Tianqing held the ancient bronze bracelet with his own hands and truly felt its power. That weak soul fluctuation was real. There was nothing fake about it. His train of thought was interrupted as he stared at the bronze bracelet with a burning gaze. To be able to enter the most secluded, secret room in the Phantom Spirit Holy Land, and to have a strand of his divine soul remaining until now, the divine soul in this bracelet has to be at least a martial god expert, right? Thinking of this, he sent a message to the Burial of Heaven through divine telekinesis. Soon, the sword of Burial of Heaven passed through the dark passage and arrived at the secret chamber. Shwa! The sword of Burial of Heaven stopped beside him and lit up with a brilliant golden light, illuminating the entire secret room. Seeing the bronze bracelet in his hand, Burial of Heaven asked, "What kind of treasure is this?" "Divine artifact." Ji Tianqing nodded and said calmly, "It should be. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been preserved until now. There are soul fluctuations in this bracelet. It's very likely that the divine soul of a martial god is hiding inside." The sword of Burial of Heaven immediately understood what he meant and said in a low voice, "It's fine. Even if it's the soul of a martial god, it might not be able to survive after the destruction of the world. Even if it has the protection of a divine artifact and barely survived, it must be very weak." Ji Tianqing didn't say anything else. Holding the bronze bracelet in his left hand, he released his divine sense with his right hand and slowly injected it into the bronze bracelet. Originally, he was worried that the bronze bracelet was still protected by divine power and that his divine sense couldn't penetrate it. But it turned out that he worried too much. His divine sense wasn't obstructed and smoothly entered the bronze bracelet. Of course, there was also a Dharma treasure space inside the bronze bracelet. But it wasn't the kind of world in the sword of Burial of Heaven. Instead, it was a vast and empty dark space. What made Ji Tianqing even more surprised was that there were many milky white balls of light floating in that boundless dark space. They were like fireflies. His divine sense passed through the darkness and came into contact with those white balls of light. Only then did he realize that they were balls of divine souls. There were a total of 19 balls of light. They were the divine souls of 19 experts. Among them, 18 of them were only the size of walnuts. There was only one divine soul that was the size of a fist. The soul fluctuation that Ji Tianqing had sensed earlier was the largest divine soul. This scene filled his heart with shock. He exclaimed in disbelief, "I didn't expect that there was more than one divine soul hidden in the bracelet. There are actually 19 of them. The strongest divine soul must be the martial god soul. The other 18 divine souls should be the martial saint's soul." Hearing his voice, the sword of Burial of Heaven asked worriedly, "One martial god soul and 18 martial saint's souls? Do they still have consciousness? Will they counterattack and attack you?" Ji Tianqing hurriedly comforted him, "Don't worry. The consciousness of these divine souls has long dissipated and they are extremely weak. They have become the purest form of divine soul power, wandering around aimlessly. They are no threat at all." The sword of Burial of Heaven heaved a sigh of relief and said excitedly, "The purest form of divine soul power? Wouldn't that be a great supplement for me?" Ji Tianqing frowned and said unhappily, what I was thinking was whether I could solve the mystery of the destruction of the illusory spirit world through these divine souls and obtain the inheritance and secret techniques of the illusory spirit clan. But you only want to devour divine souls to recover your own strength? The Sword of Burial of Heaven retorted without hesitation, the consciousness of those divine souls has dissipated. They can no longer be regarded as intelligent life. They are just balls of pure energy. Even if I devour them to recover my strength, it doesn't violate any moral principles, does it? Besides, you are the divine king who rules over 10,000 gods. What kind of divine arts and secret techniques have you not seen before? How can you be interested in the inheritance and secret techniques of the illusory spirit clan? Ji Tianqing thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Fine. The illusory spirit world is the same as the five elements world. It is just an inferior world ruled by the martial god. Since those divine souls have become pure energy, I don't want to waste my energy to investigate any secrets. I will give them to you to devour." The Sword of Burial of Heaven thought for a moment, then reminded him, 1 martial god's soul and 18 martial saints' souls. I definitely won't be able to devour them all. It just so happens that the White Dragon's remnant soul hasn't recovered yet. It needs to replenish its divine soul power the most. You can consider it first. Of course I have thought of that. I definitely won't let you take all the benefits. Ji Tianqing showed a smile. Then, he cast a spell and took out 2 martial saints' souls from the ancient bronze bracelet, and handed them to the Sword of Burial of Heaven. The Sword of Burial of Heaven emitted a black light and devoured the 2 walnut-sized divine souls. Then, the Sword of Burial of Heaven entered a dormant state, impatiently refining the divine soul power. Ji Tianqing put away the ancient bronze bracelet, then turned and left the secret room. He flew out of the black stone palace and flew to a palace on the side. That palace was the same as the black stone palace. It had been severely damaged both inside and out. It was a mess everywhere. Ji Tianqing spent 2 hours searching the entire palace, but he didn't find any useful treasures. Chapter 1952. In the next 20 hours, Ji Tianqing searched the 6 palaces one by one. These 6 smaller palaces were all in a mess. There were dilapidated walls everywhere in the palaces, and the ground and walls were all twisted and broken. Obviously, they had suffered a great impact. Ji Tianqing searched all 6 palaces, but he did not find any magic treasures or weapons. He only found some remaining armor fragments and 2 jade slips that were about to be eroded. The broken armor fragments were once a divine artifact, but unfortunately, they were now useless. As for the 2 cracked jade slips, they used to record a lot of information in the language of the illusory spirit clan. But now, there was not much information left in the jade slips, and only a few words were left. Ji Tianqing spent half a day carefully studying and identifying those words before he could barely understand the meaning. He guessed that the information recorded in the 2 jade slips was related to the sacrificial ceremony held by the illusory spirit clan. I found these 2 jade slips in the secret chamber of the 3rd palace in the west. In addition to these 2 jade slips, there were many ancient books and books stored in it, but they have long been turned into ashes. It seems that the palace should be the gathering place of the ceremonial officials, and the ancient books stored in the secret chamber were also records of the rituals of the illusory spirit world. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing put the 2 jade slips into the space ring and kept them. He sighed regretfully and murmured, "A world that was once incomparably prosperous and glorious is gone just like that, leaving behind only a few remnants. Unfortunately, there are too few clues left. Otherwise, I might have figured out the truth of the destruction of the illusory spirit world." After sighing for a while, he flew across the dark night sky toward the exit of the Holy Land. When he arrived at the black stone gate, he looked back at the dark space behind him, and then turned to leave. Of course, after leaving the Holy Land, he did not forget to close the black stone gate. Creak, 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 with a dull sound, the black stone gate slowly closed. Ji Tianqing turned around and was about to leave the illusory spirit clan's holy land. However, when he turned around, he saw that there was a ball of dark red flames in the pitch-black tunnel. That ball of dark red fire was about 3,000 meters away from him. The blood-red flames blazed fiercely, illuminating the surroundings. Ji Tianqing took a closer look and realized that it wasn't a flame. It was a blood god sun formed from a ball of bloody light. The blood god's illusions were 30 meters tall, and their bodies were bloated and constantly changing. Sometimes they were like giant apes, sometimes they were like violent bears, and sometimes they were like ghosts and trolls. Ji Tianqing frowned and used his divine sense to sense the blood god sun. Only then did he realize that the blood god sun's aura was very mixed. There were actually more than 30 different auras intertwined and merged together. That feeling was like pulling out the souls of dozens of people and twisting them together like twisting hemp rope. Although it was chaotic, the power gathered together was extremely powerful. Ji Tianqing could vaguely sense that the blood god sun's strength was between half-step to saint realm and martial sage realm. After all, it was still fusing and assimilating those complicated auras. Every time it fused with a chaotic aura, its strength would increase. Ji Tianqing had no doubt that if the blood god sun could fuse with all the auras, it would definitely reach martial sage realm. He immediately frowned and stared coldly at the blood god sun. He muttered to himself, "Damn it! Why would the blood god sun appear on this star core? Could it be that after the hundreds of blood god suns were killed by the void net, they left behind a large amount of remains and gathered together to form this blood god sun? This mutated blood god sun is actually the combination of hundreds of blood god suns." He thought about it and felt that this was the closest answer to the truth. No wonder the aura of this blood god sun is so chaotic and powerful. I didn't expect the blood god sun that was modified by the ancestor demon god to have such a strong vitality. It could survive after being killed by the void net. They could even fuse together and become even more powerful blood god suns. I have underestimated them. At this thought, Ji Tianqing felt extremely fortunate. Fortunately, he had intercepted the batch of blood god suns and killed them at the breaking soul cliff. If the batch of blood god suns had reached the north border battlefield, they would have been invincible and there would have been a bloodbath. Roar, roar. Just as Ji Tianqing was rejoicing, the blood god sun let out a low roar and its ferocious form closed in on him. It burst out with dazzling flames and passed through the passageway at lightning speed. It pounced on Ji Tianqing. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. When it was 1,000 feet away from Ji Tianqing, it turned into a huge demon and waved its 4 thick arms. More than 10 rays of blood light shot out. Every ray of blood light was 100 feet long and they were like 10 sharp giant swords. They covered Ji Tianqing's body. These giant swords could not only destroy his physical body, but they could also severely injure his spiritual soul. Ji Tianqing did not dare to be careless. He quickly held the Burial of Heaven sword and slashed out more than 10 rays of dazzling sword radiance. Breaking Sun Sword. With a wave of the Burial of Heaven sword, 16 golden giant swords burst out with violent power and slashed toward the blood light. This was the 7th sword of the Burial of Heaven 9 swords. Its moves were mysterious and powerful. Bang, 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 bang. The golden sword radiance collided with the blood light and a series of muffled sounds echoed in the passageway. The sword radiance and the blood light collapsed at the same time, turning into dense light fragments that splashed in all directions and hit the black rock wall. The ground and rock wall of the passageway were abnormally sturdy. The light fragments hit the rock wall and only left shallow marks. Ji Tianqing and the blood god sun exchanged blows and did not have the upper hand. The coldness in his eyes became more intense. He did not retreat at all. He took the initiative to charge at the blood god sun and raised his left palm. 5-colored divine thunder. As he shouted coldly, a five-colored brilliance surged out of his palm and turned into a beam of light that blasted toward the blood god sun. The beam of light contained heavenly thunders of 4 elements and the silver star divine fire. Its power was unpredictable. The blood god sun was a bit clumsy. It instinctively wanted to dodge, but it couldn't. Boom! A muffled sound burst out, shaking 1,000 feet radius and stirring up the gravel and dust on the ground. The blood god sun was hit in the chest by the 5-colored divine thunder. It immediately let out a cry and flew back. It was blasted 10 miles away before it crashed into the corner of the passageway, shaking off the rocks on the rock wall. When it rolled to the ground, one could see clearly that there was a washbasin-sized wound on its chest and abdomen. Thunderbolts were still attached to the wounds, flickering and crackling. The blood god hurriedly got up and roared in pain. Its body surged with blood light. After a while, its body became a 100-meter blood dragon. Chapter 1953. Ji Tianqing knew the blood god sun very well. The blood god sun's characteristics were changeable and could not be injured. No matter how badly the blood god sun was injured, even if it was cut into pieces, it could reform and recover. Of course, every time the blood god sun was injured, its power would gradually weaken. Luckily, it's only equivalent to a half-saint now. I can still deal with it. If it reaches the saint realm, it will be troublesome. This thought flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind as he swung his sword again. Heaven cleaving sword. In the blink of an eye, he rushed in front of the blood dragon and slashed down with the sword of burial of heaven. However, he did not use magic power, but the power of the heaven patching pearl. The sword of burial of heaven lit up with a holy white light and condensed into a huge white light sword that was 30 meters long. It emitted a mysterious aura. The blood dragon's ferocity was aroused as it roared furiously. As it dodged, it raised its huge front claws and slapped at Ji Tianqing. Bang! Bang! 2 loud, muffled sounds exploded almost at the same time, causing the tunnel to shake incessantly. The blood dragon could not dodge the attack of the sword of divine light. Its tail was cut off and it screamed as it flew backward. The severed tail was enveloped by the holy white light and quickly melted away. However, its huge front claws also hit Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing flew backward for 5 kilometers and crashed into the pitch-black rock wall with a plop. His face was pale as blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His chest had sunk in by an inch. Fortunately, his body had been tempered and was comparable to a half-martial saint. If not, the blood dragon's violent claw would have turned him into minced meat. Pfft! Ji Tianqing spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. He used his power to suppress the injuries in his internal organs and quickly recovered his chest. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and charged at the blood god again to attack. Heaven cleaving sword. The sword of burial of heaven burst forth with holy white light again, condensing into a giant sword that was 1,000 feet long, slashing toward the crimson dragon. The passageway wasn't very big. It was only about 3,000 meters in radius. For an expert who was half a step away from the saint realm, this little bit of space wasn't enough. It was very difficult for him to dodge and teleport. The blood dragon could only retreat with all its might, but it was still unable to dodge. Boom! The 1,000-meter-long holy light sword struck the blood dragon's head. Its huge body was split into 2 halves by the giant sword on the spot and was sent flying to both sides. The 2 halves of his body hit the rock wall and rolled to the ground. A layer of hazy white light enveloped the 2 halves of its body, quickly devouring and purifying the blood light. The blood dragon's body struggled violently, and it let out waves of miserable howls. Ji Tianqing hurriedly chased after it, and was about to use his palm to release the divine white light to purify it. However, the blood dragon was very decisive. It directly abandoned 1/3 of its body and allowed the white light to purify it. The remaining two-thirds of its body immediately escaped the white light's envelopment and gathered together, turning into a giant crimson bird that was 30 feet long. The ferocious crimson bird had a thin body, and its wings were exceptionally wide. It quickly flapped its wings, turned into a crimson stream of light, and turned to fly out. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, it flew dozens of miles away and disappeared around the corner of the passageway. Ji Tianqing was stunned for a moment, and a contemptuous sneer appeared on his face. You still want to escape now? Wishful thinking. As he spoke, he sped up on his sword, turned into a stream of light, and chased after it. After chasing for about 200 miles, he caught up with the crimson bird and launched another attack. Piercing sword. The sword of burial of heaven burst forth with dazzling white light, flashing in the darkness. The next moment, the divine white light pierced the crimson bird's back and exploded inside its body. Boom! A ball of divine white light exploded, like a mushroom cloud rising into the air, filling the 10-mile passageway. The crimson bird exploded into thousands of pieces of crimson light on the spot, scattering in the passageway. Most of the pieces of crimson light were purified by the white light. A moment later, the remaining pieces of crimson light gathered together, turning into a 30-foot-long crimson sword. However, the blood god's son had been severely injured, and more than half of it had been devoured by the heaven-mending orb. Its power was rapidly weakened, and it only had 40% of its strength left. Seeing Ji Tianqing chasing after it, it had no intention to fight and desperately escaped. Ji Tianqing did not show any mercy and chased after it. 7-star sword. Broken moon sword. Heavenly dragon palm. He kept using all kinds of secret techniques, and the blood god's son could not fight back at all. The two chased for a few hundred miles and exchanged more than 10 moves. About 15 minutes later, the blood god's son finally escaped from the black stone passageway and returned to the canyon outside. At this moment, it had turned into a 30-foot-tall giant beast, and was rushing to the other end of the canyon with all its might. The canyon was very wide, and there were not many obstacles. It was suitable for powerhouses to fight. However, its power was extremely weak, and it was already at the end of its tether. It had just flown 25 miles when a blazing white sword light attacked from behind. Boom! With a muffled sound, it was hit by the sword light and shattered into more than 10 pieces. The pieces of crimson light fell from the sky and scattered into the canyon. Before the pieces could gather again, Ji Tianqing shot out an overwhelming white light, enveloping all the pieces. This time, the blood god's son could not escape. In just 10 breaths, all the pieces of crimson light were purified by the white light and turned into pure energy, which was devoured by the heaven-mending orb. The battle finally ended. Only then did Ji Tianqing let out a sigh of relief. He put away the heaven burier sword with a tired look on his face. Then, he quickly took out a medicinal pill and swallowed it. In the void, he could neither breathe nor absorb the spirit chi of heaven and earth. Fighting in the void consumed far more magic power than usual. In order to kill this mutated blood god's son, he had almost used up all his magic power and was already exhausted. However, it was worth it to completely kill the blood god's son that was modified by the ancestor demon god. Moreover, the heaven-mending orb had devoured the mutated blood god's son and gained a lot of power, increasing its power. After taking the pill, Ji Tianqing found a secluded place to recuperate. It took him 3 whole days to completely recover his magic power. His injuries had also stabilized, and he was no longer in danger. After healing, he left the canyon and went back the way he came. Half a day later, he passed through the starry ancient path and returned to the dark and cold void. Standing in the void, he looked at the huge star core in front of him and muttered to himself, if this remnant star core is refined and modified, it can be compared to a divine artifact. It's a pity that I'm not powerful enough now. I can't absorb this star core, let alone refine it. When I return to the martial god realm, I'll refine this star core and help the burial of heaven to refine the blade and restore it to a divine artifact. Or I can give it a try when I reach the martial sage realm. Chapter 1954. Ever since Ji Tianqing had entered the void, he had been delayed for more than 30 days. There were no treasures or clues on the star core that were worth his time. Thus, he stepped into the void and flew toward the golden seal in front of him. That layer of golden light seal from the gods enveloped the entire five elements world. The illusory star core was like a sharp shuttle inserted into the five elements world, piercing a massive fissure in the golden seal. Ji Tianqing had come out from this fissure, and now he was going back the way he came. He entered the world within the sword and used his divine sense to control the sword of burial of heaven, speeding through the void. The sword of burial of heaven glowed with a golden light, like a thin bolt of lightning tearing through the void. Several hours later, the sword of burial of heaven flew into the golden seal and arrived near the pitch-black fissure. Whoosh! With a flash of light, the sword of burial of heaven entered the spatial fissure and disappeared into the darkness. The next moment, the sword of burial of heaven passed through a layer of shattered and distorted space and returned to the five elements world. A dazzling golden light lit up in the darkness at the bottom of Breaking Soul Cliff, exuding a powerful and dignified chi. Soon after, Ji Tianqing flew out of the sword of burial of heaven. He stood at the bottom of the pitch-black cliff, gripping the sword of burial of heaven. Taking a deep breath, he flew up the cliff. During his 30-some days in the void, he had not even breathed in a single breath of air, nor had he absorbed any of the world's spiritual energy. Now that he could breathe in the world's spiritual energy once more, he felt his entire body relax, as if all his pores had opened up. Soon, he returned to the sky above Breaking Soul Cliff. It was evening, and the orange setting sun was on the verge of disappearing into the horizon. The Breaking Soul Cliff was somewhat dusky, and cold winds constantly blew. Ji Tianqing looked around and saw that it was quiet, so he released his divine sense. When his divine sense spread out 100 li and enveloped the entire mountain, he quickly discovered some clues. Many messy marks had been left behind on the side and summit of the mountain. After careful observation, he discovered that most of the marks were left behind when he fought with the demon monarchs and the blood gods more than a month ago. However, a few of the marks were not left behind by the battle, but more like left behind when someone searched the mountain. This discovery made Ji Tianqing frown, a hint of suspicion flashing in his eyes. But after thinking for a moment, he guessed the reason. It's most likely that the demon race came here to search, which is why they left these traces. After all, the 10 demon monarchs, hundreds of blood gods, and thousands of demon warriors should have arrived at the northern border battlefield. After I fought with the demon race army, I left many traces near the Broken Soul Cliff. Not only were there the corpses of demon warriors, the fragments of the demon lord's treasures, and the wreckage of the flying ship. As long as demon powers find here, they would definitely find those traces and judge that something happened to blood god and demon monarchs. Although, this was not good. However, Ji Tianqing didn't care. He even took pleasure in the misfortune of others. The ancestral fiend god spent half a year to improve the perfect blood god's son, but it was destroyed before it even reached the battlefield. I wonder how it will feel when it learns of this news. After a while, Ji Tianqing collected his thoughts and flew into the sky, rushing back to Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Time flew by, and 20 days passed in a flash. That night, when the moon was bright and the stars were few, Ji Tianqing returned to Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Under the night sky, Pillar of Heaven's mountains stood quietly in the depths of the mountains, like a black pillar supporting the sky. Ji Tianqing was not in a hurry to return to the mountain peak. He stood in the night sky and observed the situation. He saw that in the valley at the foot of Pillar of Heaven's mountains, rivers had already appeared at the foot of the surrounding mountains. Although the rivers were not big, only a few 100 feet wide. But the rushing river reflected the bright moonlight, and the sparkling ripples were also beautiful. The towering pillar of heaven's mountains was also enveloped by a layer of faint five-colored spiritual light, appearing to be full of spiritual energy. On the mountain walls and cliffs, lush spiritual herbs and spiritual trees grew. It was a thriving state. In the cliffs above the clouds, there was a five-colored waterfall, continuously sprinkling five-colored spiritual liquid. Such a magnificent scene, even if one saw it at night, was intoxicating. Ji Tianqing revealed a gratified smile and whispered to himself, "I've been away for more than 2 months, and there are finally changes in Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Now, it looks like what a martial arts holy land should look like." Although the current appearance of Pillar of Heaven's mountains was quite different from the Holy Land in the past. But this was a very good start. Ji Tianqing believed that at most, in another 10 years, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would be able to return to its former glory. He passed through the thick clouds and returned to the peak of Pillar of Heaven's mountains. The bright moonlight shone on the peak of the mountain and spread over the 100-mile dojo. The dojo was like a mirror, reflecting the silver-white moonlight, illuminating the surrounding palaces and mansions. There were a few teams of patrolling guards, all wearing armor and holding swords, carrying out their tasks meticulously. The various palaces and mansions on the peak of the mountain were also peaceful and quiet, with little lights lit up. Ji Tianqing looked around and saw that during the time he was away, nothing had happened to Pillar of Heaven's mountains. He was quite satisfied and quietly flew across the dojo and returned to Pillar of Heaven's palace. After entering the secret chamber, he opened a secret passage in the corner of the secret chamber and entered the Star Divine Furnace underground. After more than 2 months, when he entered the Star Divine Furnace, he found that the entire Star Divine Furnace was filled with a sea of fire. The surging Star Divine Fire was like a silver lake, surging and stirring up waves. The star torch in the middle of the divine furnace had long been submerged in the sea of fire. The violent star divine power tightly wrapped around him and constantly poured into his body. He silently operated the star body refining art, imperceptibly absorbing the star divine power. The 3 corners of the star divine furnace were occupied by Black Dragon, Qianyu, and White Dragon. He first went to check on Black Dragon and Qianyu. Black Dragon and Qianyu were still cultivating in seclusion, using the star divine fire to temper their bodies. What surprised him was that Black Dragon and Qianyu had both passed the heavenly tribulation and reached the second layer of the tribulation passing realm. Of course, Qianyu was the first to pass the tribulation. Its strength was a bit stronger and was not far from the third layer of the tribulation passing realm. Little Black Dragon was the last to pass the tribulation, but its strength foundation was more stable and its magic power was more vigorous. Seeing that Black Dragon and Qianyu were fine, Ji Tianqing was relieved. He flew to another corner of the Star Divine Furnace to check on White Dragon. The Great Formation was intact, and the glazed treasure bottle was also fine. However, the longevity vine in the bottle was obviously shorter by half. White Dragon's remnant soul had also grown a bit stronger and had formed a fist-sized cyclone. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing was quite gratified. He took out the copper bracelet called the Ancient God Star Fixing Ring from the interspatial ring. He took out a walnut-sized martial saint's soul from the copper bracelet and threw it into the glazed treasure bottle. The martial saint's soul had no consciousness and was just a pure divine power. It would not harm White Dragon's remnant soul at all. White Dragon's remnant soul first circled around the martial saint's soul a few times. Chapter 1955. The White Dragon's remnant soul was in a very complicated state. The remnant soul was very strong and tenacious. It was even stronger than the martial saint's soul. Even after a few hundred years, the remnant soul would not dissipate if it could not replenish its power. It could still be preserved perfectly. But it was very weak. After all, it did not have a clear consciousness and only had a vague instinct. If no one helped it, it would not be able to devour soul power to repair itself. Even if Ji Tianqing helped it by setting up the array and using the glazed treasure bottle and the longevity vine. The speed at which it devoured soul power was still too slow. After an entire day, it had only devoured less than 10% of the martial saint's soul power. Moreover, it had to stop and sleep to slowly digest the soul power. Ji Tianqing was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. He had tried his best. The only thing he could do now was to wait. He hoped that the White Dragon's remnant soul could refine the martial saint's soul as soon as possible and regain its consciousness. He understood that the White Dragon's remnant soul was too weak. Now was the initial stage of recovering its power. It was equivalent to laying the foundation. Of course, the speed was the slowest. When the White Dragon's remnant soul regained its consciousness, the speed of recovery would double. Ji Tianqing took out a martial saint's soul from the ancient bronze bracelet and placed it in the glazed treasure bottle. Then, he left the Star Divine Furnace. When he returned to the secret chamber, it was already the morning of the third day. He summoned Ji Bai and ordered him to summon the Huanglong Daoist. After a quarter of an hour, the Huanglong Daoist hurried over. The Huanglong Daoist entered the secret chamber and saw Ji Tianqing sitting on the throne with his eyes closed. He quickly bowed respectfully. Disciple Huanglong greets Master. Master, you have been gone for a few months. You have finally returned safely. Ji Tianqing opened his eyes and looked at him. He asked calmly, "What's wrong?" During this time, what happened in the Pillar of Heaven's mountains? The Huanglong Daoist quickly shook his head and explained, "The Pillar of Heaven's mountains is safe and sound. There were no accidents. It's just that you acted alone to kill the demon army and the blood god. It's been more than 2 months, and there's still no news from you. The disciples and elders are all very worried." Ji Tianqing waved his hand and comforted him. "There was a small incident when I was trying to kill the blood god's son at the Broken Soul Cliff, and it did take a lot of time. However, I've wiped out the demon army in the blood god, so there's nothing to worry about." Huanglong Daoist was relieved and said excitedly, 10 demonic monarchs and hundreds of blood gods. Master actually killed them all. This was simply inconceivable. Master, you have not recovered to the martial sage realm and you already have such shocking skills. When you return to the martial sage realm, won't it be the end of the North Underworld Mountain? It's not that exaggerated. Ji Tianqing shook his head and asked in a dignified tone, "How is the situation of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and the 9 sects and 18 schools in the past few months?" Huanglong Daoist reported, "Master, the 9 sects and 18 schools have pledged their allegiance and joined forces to set up a defense circle to protect the safety of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. They will listen to our orders at any time. The hundreds of cities and hundreds of millions of people have also pledged their allegiance and did not dare to have any disloyalty. In the past 3 months, the martial artists of the 9 sects and 18 schools and the various cities have captured and killed dozens of demon clan members. Although those demon clan members were ordinary soldiers and there were only a few cross-calamity realm martial artists. However, I've already followed your rules and rewarded those people according to their merits. The prestige of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains is growing and it's deeply rooted in people's hearts. I estimate that in at most 10 years, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains will be able to restore its prestige and power." After he finished talking about the 9 sects and 18 schools, he reported the situation of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. "Ever since Master ordered us to double the amount of cultivation resources, the disciples have been working hard and cultivating with all their might. In the past 6 months, the strength of the disciples has increased significantly. Especially the deacons, there are 3 new cross-calamity realm martial artists. Disciple plans to wait until autumn next year to select an elder from those 3 people." Huanglong Daoist described the situation of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains in detail, his tone full of expectation. Ji Tianqing listened carefully, nodding and shaking his head from time to time, giving corresponding opinions. In the blink of an eye, an hour passed. Huanglong Daoist finished his report and was about to leave. Ji Tianqing warned, "Huanglong, although the situation is getting better and better, you can't relax. You still have to keep an eye on the 9 sects and 18 schools. In addition, you can't relax the guidance of the disciples. If you have time, you can personally guide those trustworthy and moldable deacons and disciples. Recently, my power has increased by several times. I'm preparing to go into seclusion for half a month to welcome the next heavenly tribulation. Huanglong Daoist bowed and said, I understand. Please rest assured, Master. After he finished speaking, he bowed and left the secret room. After Huanglong Daoist left, Ji Tianqing prepared to go into seclusion to cultivate and break through to the 5th stage of the cross-calamity realm. However, before he went into seclusion, he first sent a communication jade slip to Ji Ku. He had given this matter a lot of thought. Last time, Ji Ku sent him a message to tell him about the blood god's son. At that time, Ji Ku's situation was critical and she was seriously injured. Ji Tianqing was worried about her safety, but he didn't dare to rashly send a message, lest her identity be exposed. Now, more than 2 months had passed. In his opinion, Ji Ku's situation should be safe. He took out a black communication jade slip and used his divine sense to input his thoughts into the jade slip. Whoosh! With a flash of light, the communication jade slip flew out of the secret room and immediately disappeared into the sky. The black jade slip is specially made. On the surface, it looks very similar to the communication jade slip of the devil race. It shouldn't cause Ku any trouble, this thought flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind as he waited patiently. After a full hour, a dark purple light flew into the secret room. Whoosh! The purple light fell into his palm. It was a devil race's jade slip. He held the jade slip in his hand and probed it with his divine sense. Immediately, a wave of information poured into his mind. Ji Ku's clear and calm voice sounded in his mind. Big Brother Tianqing, the previous injury was an accident. However, I have already taken care of it. You don't have to worry. For the past 3 months, I have stayed in the Devil Palace in the North Underworld Mountain and didn't go out to perform any missions. I have gradually gained the trust of the great Devil Saint and the generals, and I have also inquired about a lot of information. The group of Devil Monarchs and Blood God's sons still haven't arrived at the North Border battlefield, which aroused the great Devil Saint's suspicion. The great Devil Saint sent people to investigate and found the corpses of the Devil race near the Broken Soul Cliff, as well as the wreckage of the flying boat. All the Devil race had disappeared without a trace. When the news reached the North Underworld Mountain, I guessed that it was you. I was very happy and excited. The ancestor Devil God was furious, and the great Devil Saint was also furious. He sent a large group of experts to investigate this matter and find the culprit. In addition, there was also a very secret news. A human expert found a grotto heaven secret realm in the ruins of God. Chapter 1956. When Ji Tianqing heard this, he was already tempted. He had heard of the Yin-Yang sages 1,000 years ago. More than 2,000 years ago, Shenwu continent had been embroiled in chaos, and various races had fought each other. Although the 3 divine kingdoms had been established, the overall situation of Shenwu continent had been relatively stable. However, there had been constant small-scale disputes. This was especially true for the regions outside of the 3 divine kingdoms' territories, which had become even more chaotic. In this chaotic era, the powerhouses of dozens of races had declared themselves kings and attacked each other, seizing territories and resources. The 3 divine kingdoms could not interfere, so they could only suppress the chaos within their borders. They were indifferent to the conflicts outside of their borders. At this moment, 2 powerful martial sages with extraordinary means appeared out of nowhere. They were able to move freely, suppress the chaos, and resolve the disputes between the various races. They had won the respect of countless powerhouses and the admiration of hundreds of millions of people. In a short 20 years, the 2 martial saints had pacified the various regions outside of the 3 divine kingdoms. Dozens of powers, races, and tribes had publicly expressed their allegiance to the two martial saints. Countless commoners had even taken the initiative to ask the two martial saints to stay and lead them to prosperity. However, the two martial saints were not attached to power and drifted away, returning to seclusion. The two martial saints were the famous yin-yang sages. The two of them were a celestial couple. The male martial saint, Yang Tian, was a peak martial saint of the human race. He was a peerless powerhouse with extraordinary talent. The female martial saint, Yin Qi, was the princess of the Ice Feather clan of the demon race. She was a peerless genius martial saint. The two of them had similar backgrounds and experiences. They had both been born in ancient and noble clans, and their statuses were prestigious. However, when they were young, their clans had met with great changes and been destroyed. The two of them had shouldered the burden of a blood feud and had struggled to survive. In the end, the two of them had risen to become peerless powerhouses and had taken their revenge. Although there were close to 100 martial saints in the world, the yin-yang sages did not have much experience and were very young. However, their strength had reached the rank 8 and rank 9 martial sage realm. Among the martial saints, they were already peak existences. Yang Tian, in particular, was known as the genius closest to becoming a martial god. If a fourth martial god appeared on the continent, it would be him. However, the good times did not last long. More than 1,800 years ago, the last time the yin-yang saints appeared was in the depths of the ruins of God. At that time, both of them had reached the 9th level martial sage realm and seemed to have been exploring the ruins of deity in search of an opportunity to break through to the martial god realm. But since then, the yin-yang saints had never shown their faces again. For the next 300 years, countless warriors on the continent were discussing and curious about the whereabouts of the yin-yang saints. Most people believed that the twin sages of yin and yang must be cultivating in seclusion in a secret realm, trying their best to break through to the martial god realm. However, this was only everyone's guess, and they were unable to confirm it. That was until more than 1,500 years ago, when the Kenshin appeared out of nowhere and rose to prominence as an invincible force, entering the sights of all the martial artists in the world. Since then, Kenshin had attracted everyone's attention, drawing the fanatical worship of hundreds of millions of martial artists. All the martial practitioners in the world were discussing him passionately and worshipping him like a god. Especially when Kenshin had broken through to the martial god realm, taught the two martial gods, and left through the rift. His various feats had caused huge waves throughout the Shinwu continent, and they had been discussed by the common people for thousands of years. The legends of the yin-yang saints were gradually forgotten by the common people. If not for Ji Ke's message mentioning this matter, Ji Tianqing would never have thought of it. He held the jade slip in his hand and muttered to himself, "There are rumors that the yin-yang saints are cultivating in seclusion in a secret realm, trying their best to break through to the martial god realm." Who would have thought that after 1,800 years, the yin-yang saints would never appear again? Now, there's finally news, but they've already passed away. The legendary yin-yang saints were a match made in heaven, and the woman was the most beautiful in the world, while the man was unparalleled in elegance. They were a match made in heaven, and everyone envied them. In the martial world, where power and influence ruled, this couple was elegant and otherworldly, like a clear stream in a muddy world. They had actually died without a trace, which was quite a pity. Ji Tianqing sighed, and his heart was filled with regret. At this time, Ji Ke continued, after those powerhouses discovered the secret realm of the yin-yang saints, a great battle broke out before they could even enter. Although most of them died, there were a few who managed to escape alive. After the news spread, countless adventurers and martial artists flocked to the secret realm. Even the martial arts organizations of the various divine kingdoms sent their elites into the ruins of God. Everyone wanted to enter the yin-yang secret realm to obtain the martial arts inheritance of the yin-yang saints, as well as the wealth and treasures they had accumulated throughout their lives. At this point, Ji Ke paused for a moment before continuing. After the great demon saint heard the news, he wanted to go to the ruins of God personally to explore the Yin-Yang secret realm. However, he had a heavy responsibility and could not leave the North Underworld mountain without permission. Therefore, he gave this task to the newly ascended demon saint, the fifth demon saint, Ji Xiaoluo. Ji Xiaoluo is already gathering his troops, and he plans to bring 100 elites to the ruins of God. I'm thinking of a way to join this team and make a trip to the ruins of God. After talking about the Yin-Yang secret realm, Ji Ke suddenly thought of something and added, "Oh right, there's one more thing." The fourth demon saint, Patriarch Xue Pao, had his Dharma body destroyed. After escaping back to the North Underworld mountain, he entered the abyss to recuperate. I heard that Patriarch Xue Pao had to recuperate for 100 years before he could reconstruct his Dharma body and regain his peak strength. The ancestor Fiend Celestial felt that it was too long, so he personally used a secret technique to heal Patriarch Xue Pao. He should be able to recover in about half a year. Brother Tianqing, Patriarch Xue Pao was injured at Tianzhu Mountain. After he recovers, he will definitely go to Tianzhu Mountain again to seek revenge. You must be mentally prepared and be on guard. Ji Ke exhorted in a solemn tone, and then the transmission ended. Ji Tianqing silently kept the transmission jade slip and frowned as he fell into deep thought. I was right. Patriarch Xue Pao will need 100 years to reconstruct his Dharma body. This is something the ancestor Fiend Celestial does not want to see. He is currently lacking manpower and will definitely use other methods to heal Patriarch Xue Pao quickly. Even if he has to destroy Patriarch Xue Pao's demonic foundation and sacrifice his future, the ancestor Fiend Celestial will not mind. This result was just as Ji Tianqing had expected. He was not surprised at all. After all, Patriarch Xue Pao would need half a year to recover. Only then would he come to Tianzhu Mountain to seek revenge. Ji Tianqing did not mind. What really surprised him was the appearance of the fifth demon saint, Ji Xiaoluo. The ancestor Fiend Celestial is indeed powerful to have nurtured the fifth demon saint in such a short time. Since the various powers and Ji Xiaoluo are going to the ruins of God to obtain the inheritance and treasures of the Yin-Yang saints, I must go to the ruins of God. Not only do I want to join in the fun, but I also want to meet the new demon saint. Chapter 1957. Ji Tianqing had made up his mind to go to the ruins of God. However, he was not in a hurry. The mystic realm where the Yin-Yang saints had passed away was not a place for ordinary people to enter. Even if various forces and adventurers flocked there, he did not have to worry at all. The mystic realm and treasures could only be obtained by those who were fated. It did not mean that whoever arrived first would get it first. Ji Tianqing decided to cultivate in seclusion for a few days and break through to the fifth level of the tribulation stage as soon as possible. After all, his strength had reached the peak of the fourth level and was not far from the fifth level. After he was ready, he passed through the secret passage in the corner of the secret chamber and entered the star divine furnace underground. Swoosh! He stretched his limbs and dived into the silver-white sea of fire, allowing the star divine fire to burn his body. He shuttled through the sea of fire like a fish and quickly swam to the center of the sea of fire and sat cross-legged on the star torch. Then, he focused on using the star body refinement art to absorb the star divine fire to refine his Dharma body. 8 days passed quickly. Ji Tianqing cultivated in the star divine furnace for 8 days without being disturbed by anyone. After 8 days of cultivation, not only had his physical body strengthened to the extreme, but he had also absorbed a large amount of star divine fire. His strength had increased by 80% and reached the limit of the fourth level of the tribulation stage. Therefore, he ended his cultivation and left the star divine furnace. After returning to the secret chamber, he naturally sensed something in his mind. In the unseen world, the heavenly Tao sent down a hazy thought. His fifth tribulation would be in 2 days. After confirming the date of the tribulation, Ji Tianqing calmly meditated and adjusted his breath. He had to adjust to the best state to welcome the arrival of the tribulation. Of course, in these 2 days, he had to continue to condense the sword intent. Condensing the sword intent now could not only greatly increase his combat strength, but more importantly, it was to prepare for the future. When he returned to the martial sage realm, he would hide the sword in the void and control thousands of swords. Without his sword intent, the power would be greatly reduced. Unknowingly, 2 days passed. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ji Tianqing ended his cultivation and walked out of the secret chamber. After 2 days of cultivation, his sword intent was more condensed and would soon be successfully condensed. Of course, this was a matter for the future. What he needed to do now was to transcend the 5th tribulation. Ji Tianqing leisurely walked out of the Heaven Pillar Palace and came to the dojo that had a radius of 100 miles. It was the time for the morning sun to rise. The warm sunlight shone on the dojo. The morning fog had just dispersed, and the air was still filled with fresh spiritual energy. More than 30 green-robed outer disciples were practicing their swordsmanship on the dojo. Everyone's movements were uniform. Sword light flashed, and sword chi burst forth, showing their valiant poise. Even though those disciples were only practicing the 4 C's return to one sword technique created by Kenshin, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains introductory sword technique, the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains sword technique. However, everyone practiced very seriously and carefully. Their moves were perfect. It was obvious that they had put in a lot of effort for many years. Ji Tianqing was satisfied and couldn't help but reveal a gratified smile. When he walked to the center of the training hall and prepared to receive the heavenly tribulation, the disciples had just finished practicing their swordsmanship. Everyone gathered in groups of 3 to 5 to exchange their experiences in martial arts and swordsmanship. Suddenly, someone saw Ji Tianqing and immediately shouted excitedly, "Look! It's young Master Ji." This shout was like a stone thrown into a lake, causing ripples to appear on the surface of the lake. The rest of the disciples were alarmed and looked towards the center of the training hall. After seeing Ji Tianqing, everyone was excited. They cheered and discussed. "It's been 3 months and young Master Ji has appeared again. Ha ha ha. Young Master Ji is so elusive. Every time he appears, he has to transcend the tribulation. I bet that young Master Ji is going to transcend the tribulation again after cultivating in seclusion for 3 months. Everyone, look. The weather is changing. Tribulation clouds are forming. What are you waiting for? Go and inform the other disciples to come and watch young Master Ji transcend the tribulation." More than half of the green-robed disciples hurriedly left the training hall to inform the others. The remaining green-robed disciples also consciously retreated to the edge of the training hall and watched excitedly. Wind and clouds gathered high in the sky. Boundless gray clouds gathered above the Heaven Pillar Mountain. About 15 minutes later, the gray clouds gathered and turned into a 100-mile-wide black cloud vortex that enveloped the training hall. The morning sun was blocked and the peak of the Heaven Pillar Mountain became dark. A terrifying aura spread out from the tribulation cloud vortex and enveloped the Heaven Pillar Mountain. Purple, gold, and blue lightning flashed and exploded in the vortex. Hundreds of people who heard the news gathered around the training hall and looked at the training hall with anticipation. Ji Tianqing stood in the middle of the training hall calmly, exuding the aura of the heaven and earth. Soon, the first bolt of lightning struck. Kaboom! Just as Ji Tianqing expected, this was his 5th tribulation. 5 bolts of lightning struck from the tribulation cloud vortex. The 5 bolts of lightning were of different colors. They were gold, red, purple, blue, and there was also a bolt of black lightning. This type of black lightning contained the power of annihilation. It was terrifying and unpredictable. Ji Tianqing had seen it the last time when he transcended the tribulation. He was fearless as he calmly raised his palms. He put his index and middle fingers together on his left palm and used the sword Soul Dao technique to stab the sky 9 times. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 9 huge golden swords were born. They carried the power of annihilation and blasted towards the 5 bolts of lightning. He drew a circle with his right palm and struck out a mysterious black light. It turned into a huge vortex and flew into the sky. Bang! 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 Loud noises were heard as the sword light shattered the 5 bolts of lightning on the spot. Thousands of lightning fragments fell and were enveloped by the black vortex. They were immediately swallowed by Ji Tianqing. Just like that, the first heavenly lightning was easily neutralized by him. Next, the tribulation cloud vortex struck the second and third bolts of lightning one after another. Whether it was 10 bolts of lightning striking at the same time or 20 bolts of lightning striking at the same time, the result was the same. Ji Tianqing struck out a sword light with his left palm and a vortex with his right palm. He easily destroyed the bolts of lightning and devoured them. After the third bolt of lightning, the tribulation cloud vortex surged faster and started to change. By the time the fourth bolt of lightning struck, the number of lightning pillars had reached 40. Moreover, each lightning pillar had 5 colors. When the powers of the 5 attributes were mixed together, the power increased by several times. The most terrifying thing was that the 40 bolts of lightning were arranged in an orderly manner. They contained the mysteries of the heavenly Tao and the power of a formation. It was even more terrifying and unpredictable. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to be cautious and use 100% of his strength to resist. 15 minutes later, the 4th, 5th, and 6th bolts of lightning were all neutralized by him. Even when the 6th bolt of lightning struck, there were as many as 160 bolts of lightning, densely packed like a sword formation and a rain of arrows. He still destroyed all the bolts of lightning and devoured them. He was completely unscathed and looked completely relaxed. To him, no matter how strong the first 6 bolts of lightning were, they were just appetizers. The real highlight was the last 3 bolts of lightning. Chapter 1958. After the 6 bolts of lightning, the tribulation cloud vortex began to change again. The pitch-black tribulation cloud vortex was soon dyed with a layer of dark red blood. The 7th bolt of lightning finally descended. A dark red bolt of lightning struck down and turned into a large ball of blood light that enveloped Ji Tianqing. This was the inner demon tribulation. Ji Tianqing was enveloped by the blood light. His soul and consciousness were trapped in illusions as he endured the test of the inner demon. All kinds of illusions came at him. All kinds of bizarre but traceable pictures were constantly interrogating his soul. His willpower was under great stimulation and test. However, he maintained his original heart and did not waver. In the blink of an eye, an hour passed. Ji Tianqing finally turned the misfortune into a blessing and successfully resolved the inner demon tribulation. The dark red blood light that enveloped him also quickly dissipated. Immediately after, the 8th bolt of lightning descended. Kaboom! A 1,000-foot-long 5-colored bolt of lightning that looked like a divine dragon struck down from the tribulation cloud vortex. This was the great tribulation of wind and fire. Ji Tianqing could neither dodge nor resist. He could only endure the test. After the bolt of lightning struck him, it immediately turned into a 5-colored lightning fire that enveloped his body. The 5 elemental lightning enveloped him and ruthlessly struck his body. The blazing 9 heavens hurricane and the mysterious black flames surged into his body and burned his blood, bone marrow, and internal organs. Ji Tianqing calmly endured and used the great tribulation of wind and fire to temper his avatar. His skin and flesh continued to fester and burn into black ashes that scattered in the sky. However, he quickly grew new flesh and blood that was stronger than before. After a full 15 minutes, the great tribulation of wind and fire gradually dissipated. He had successfully passed the great tribulation of wind and fire and tempered his avatar. His strength had more than doubled. After the 8 bolts of lightning, the tribulation cloud vortex suddenly slowed down. The vortex within a radius of 50 kilometers began to rapidly shrink and condense, becoming more and more solid. Within the black clouds, there was even a five-colored dazzling light that emitted a mysterious power. Ji Tianqing looked up at the tribulation cloud vortex and murmured expectantly, "I have already passed the tribulation of 7 emotions, reincarnation, time, and 5 elements. What tribulation will I face this time?" Roughly 100 breaths of time later, the tribulation cloud vortex had shrunk by 10 times, becoming only 10 miles in radius. Finally, the 9th bolt of lightning struck. Boom! A dazzling 5-colored lightning bolt shot down from the tribulation cloud vortex. At that moment, an earth-shattering sound of thunder shook the heavens. The entire pillar of heaven's mountains shook, and the heavens and earth were filled with an indescribable divine might. The dazzling light illuminated the entire peak of the pillar of heaven's mountains. It was so dazzling that no one could open their eyes. Ji Tianqing was suppressed by the formless power of the heavenly Tao. He was under unimaginable pressure, and his face turned pale. After the 5-colored heavenly lightning struck him, it immediately turned into a dazzling 5-colored light that enveloped him. After a long while, the world finally regained its calm. Only the dazzling 5-colored light with a radius of 10 miles was left floating quietly in the sky above the dojo. The hundreds of disciples around the dojo looked at this scene with confusion and whispered to each other. No one knew what mysteries this heavenly lightning had. At the same time, Ji Tianqing was in a vast world. The sky was blue, and there were white clouds floating in the sky. A dazzling golden sun hung in the western sky, casting down a golden light for hundreds of millions of kilometers. Ji Tianqing stood on the peak of a mountain. Below his feet was a blue stone the size of a house. He was surrounded by a dense forest with towering trees. The forest was dark, and the ground was covered with flowers and vines. There were also clusters of shrubs. There were flocks of birds with gorgeous feathers chirping on the branches in the forest. There were also many snakes, insects, and beasts that quietly moved through the forest, making rustling sounds. Looking into the distance, there was a vast grassland at the foot of the mountain, with green weeds growing. There were flocks of birds flying in the sky above the grassland, and there were also agile tigers, leopards, and jackals hunting each other in the grass. At the end of the grassland, there was a mirror-like lake that reflected the light. Further away, the horizon was blocked by a dark green mountain range. Ji Tianqing stood on the bluestone, taking in everything around him. Breathing in the fresh and pleasant air and feeling the vast spirit qi of the world, he felt refreshed. Such a picturesque and peaceful world is a good place to cultivate in seclusion. However, I'm in the midst of a heavenly tribulation, and this space is definitely a test. This thought flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind, and he remained vigilant at all times. He stepped into the sky and flew across the grassland like a stream of light, heading towards the end of the horizon. First, he had to understand this space and find out what kind of test it was before he could think of a way to resolve it. Half an hour later, he flew across the grassland and the majestic mountain range, arriving at the end of the horizon. There was endless darkness at the end, and there was nothing there. It was sealed by the invisible power of the heavenly Tao. He turned around and flew in another direction to investigate the size of this space. About 2 hours later, he figured it out. This was a space with a radius of 10,000 miles, like a small world. There were mountains and rivers, flowers and trees, birds and beasts, and all living things. It was no different from the 5 elements realm. However, this small world was wrapped in endless darkness and sealed by the power of the heavenly Tao. He was trapped in the small world and could not get out. Could it be like the 5 elements tribulation last time, where I had to borrow the power of the small world to break through the darkness seal? It shouldn't be. The final test of each heavenly tribulation is different. The test of this heavenly tribulation is definitely not the 5 elements tribulation. Ji Tianqing stood high in the sky, frowning as he fell into deep thought. In the end, he decided to give it a try. He flew to the end of the small world and controlled the power of the 5 elements to condense a mountain range that extended into the darkness. However, the dark void was like an invisible wall, and no power could enter. He tried to step into the darkness, but the moment he touched the darkness, he was sent flying back. The result was as he expected. The dark void was sealed by the heavenly Tao, and he had no chance of escaping. If he wanted to resolve the test of the heavenly tribulation, he could only start from the small world. In the following half a month, Ji Tianqing had been wandering in the small world, searching for clues to resolve the test. However, he turned the entire small world upside down several times, but he still did not find anything. He had no clue. He was trapped in this small world and could not escape at all. However, when he was wandering in the small world, he discovered a strange thing. There was no night in the small world, and it was always daytime. The wolves, tigers, leopards, birds, and beasts that he saw before were also growing at an exaggerated speed. Most importantly, the flow of time in the small world was more than 1,000 times faster than the outside world. He wandered in the small world for half a month, and it was actually equivalent to 50 years. In 50 years, the small sapling became a towering tree, the birds and beasts became demons, and the wolves, tigers, and leopards also became demonic beasts. He also became old, and his appearance was actually like a man in his 30s. Chapter 1959. Is this heavenly tribulation's test related to time? This was Ji Tianqing's first thought. He knew very well that there were many kinds of power in the world. For example, the 5 elements, space, thunder, wind, rain, and so on could all be controlled by martial artists. Only the power of time was the most mysterious and difficult to master. Martial artists below the god realm could only use some formations and refining materials to change the flow of time. If one wanted to truly control time, it was only possible to reach the god realm. But on second thought, it didn't seem right. I've already passed the space-time tribulation before. There's no reason for another time test, right? With a heart full of doubts, Ji Tianqing continued to wander in the small world. Soon, another half a year had passed. With his concept of time, half a year had passed in the small world. But in fact, 600 years had passed in the small world. The former grassland had turned into a forest, and many towering trees had withered and aged. The newborn birds and beasts had turned into demons, and the aging beasts gradually died. In the small world, scenes of new life and death were played out every day. Ji Tianqing's form and face gradually changed, and he became a 40-year-old middle-aged man. He had explored the small world with a radius of 10,000 miles hundreds of times, and he couldn't be more familiar with it. But he still had no clue. He didn't know what this test was or how to resolve it. He could only cultivate in the small world and wait silently. Unknowingly, 6 years had passed. Ji Tianqing's strength had reached the limit of the 5th level of the tribulation realm, but he could no longer improve. More than 7,000 years had passed in the small world, and there had been tremendous changes. The vicissitudes of life, the scenes of new life and death, he had seen them all. And his own appearance had also undergone tremendous changes. He had become old and weak, and he had become a white-haired old man with a white beard that reached his chest. Even his strength had declined, his realm was constantly falling, and his magic power was becoming more and more exhausted. Such a scene made him anxious and worried. With complicated emotions, he sighed, no matter how high a martial artist's wisdom is, they can't withstand the passage of time and the erosion of the vicissitudes of time. Even a peerless martial god can't escape the 10,000-year limit. In the end, they will turn into ashes and return to heaven and earth. Only the heavens and earth exist forever. No matter how many tens of thousands of years pass, it will never disappear. As he thought of this, an idea suddenly flashed through his mind. All living things can't escape the 10,000-year limit. Even martial gods are no exception. Only heaven and earth can exist forever. Could it be that the test of this heavenly tribulation is related to heaven and earth? At the thought of this, Ji Tianqing was enlightened. His deep eyes flashed with a bright light. He hurriedly used the armillary heaven secret technique to merge himself with heaven and earth. Shwa! In the blink of an eye, his figure disappeared, becoming one with the heaven and earth within 1,000 miles. At the same time, the peaceful small world began to change dramatically. The sun that always hung in the sky gradually disappeared into the darkness. The small world lost its light and was shrouded in boundless darkness. Immediately after, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth rapidly dissipated, and even the air disappeared. In just a few years, the small world had become a vacuum zone, no different from the dark void. The flowers and trees began to wither and wither. Large tracts of forests and grasslands turned into ashes and dust. The birds and beasts also quickly died. Even the demonic beasts with magic power gradually withered and died. 50 years later, the small world became a dark and cold world without any life. All living things had died, leaving only the cold earth. Of course, the only life that survived was Ji Tianqing. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing finally understood. I see. I understand now, this is the great tribulation of heaven and earth. When he was in the upper realm, he had heard of the great tribulation of heaven and earth and the legend of the 5 decays of heaven and man. Under the shroud of the heavenly axioms every world was in the cycle of reincarnation, and all living things had a great limit. From new birth, to growth, to prosperity, then to decline, perish, and rebirth, the cycle repeated. In low-level small worlds, 100,000 years was a cycle. All living things from new birth, to reproduction, development, and prosperity, until the great tribulation of heaven and earth arrived and returned to death, usually only took 100,000 years. For a large world like the 5 elements world, it usually took a few 100,000 to 1,000,000 years for a cycle. In the beginning, the world was a cold and dead wasteland, icebergs, and seas. There were no living things. It was only when the 5 elements spirit chi appeared that flowers, trees, and all living things appeared in the world. Then, in the long years, all living things developed, grew, and gradually gained intelligence. When the world developed to its limit and all living things grew to their limit, the great tribulation of heaven and earth would arrive. All living things would be destroyed and returned to the world. When the next era came, the world would be reborn. Of course, no matter how many cycles the world went through, only heaven and earth would exist forever. After understanding all this, Ji Tianqing was suddenly enlightened and no longer worried. The changes in this small world are the microcosms of the various worlds. When the great tribulation of heaven and earth arrives, all living things will be destroyed, even martial gods are no exception. Only by transforming into heaven and earth can one avoid the great tribulation and survive. Ji Tianqing made up his mind and used the secret technique with all his might, trying his best to merge with the wider heaven and earth. As time passed, the world within a radius of 5,000 kilometers gradually shrank and dissipated. Soon, another 2,000 years had passed. The world within 5,000 kilometers shrank by more than half and was only left with a radius of 1,500 kilometers. Ji Tianqing endured in the 1,500 kilometers of heaven and earth with incomparable fatigue, waiting for a new life. His mind and dermic powers were exhausted and he was on the verge of fainting. Up until now, he had already spent 10,000 years in this small world. The great tribulation had passed and a new life had arrived. A dazzling golden light appeared in the sky above Ji Tianqing. The sun reappeared and its bright sunlight illuminated the world within 3,000 kilometers. The power of the 5 elements gradually appeared and brought vitality to this world. Heaven and earth spirit chi reappeared and the cold desert turned into a mountain range with saplings and buds growing. In just a few short decades, the world within 3,000 kilometers returned to its original state and was filled with mountains, forests, grasslands, and lakes. Birds and beasts appeared one after another and grew healthily. The small world also began to expand to 4,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers, 6,000 kilometers. 100 years later, the small world grew to a radius of 5,000 kilometers and returned to its original state. Just like when Ji Tianqing first entered this place, it was a picturesque treasure land filled with spirit qi. At this moment, Ji Tianqing's test was finally over. He had successfully transcended the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Swoosh! With a flash of light, the world within 5,000 kilometers became distorted and blurry and soon dissipated. On the dojo at the peak of the heavenly pillar mountain, the five-colored light within a radius of 5 kilometers quickly faded and disappeared. Ji Tianqing's figure appeared and stood in the sky safe and sound. Chapter 1960. Bursts of thunderous cheers rang out around the training hall and lasted for a long time. Ji Tianqing opened his eyes and saw the scene around him. He couldn't help but smile with relief. Although he had spent 10,000 years in the small world and had undergone a reincarnation and rebirth, those were all illusions created by the heavenly Tao and had nothing to do with the real world. In reality, he had only slept for 6 hours in the five-colored light. Of course, he was still in his original appearance. He had the face of a 20-year-old and a handsome and mighty appearance. He didn't become a white-haired old man. His strength and realm didn't fall, and his mental state was still full. He looked down at himself, looked up at his surroundings, and recalled the experience just now. He felt as if a lifetime had passed. Back then, I only heard of the great tribulation of heaven and earth, but I didn't have the chance to experience it myself. Now that I think about it, even if I become a god, I might not be able to escape the great tribulation of heaven and earth, right? In this world, what could be immortal and indestructible? The king of gods? Heaven and earth? Or the sun, moon, and stars? Just as he was filled with emotions and thinking to himself, the vortex of tribulation clouds high in the sky dissipated and turned into a ball of sacred golden light that sprinkled down. Swoosh! The sacred golden light enveloped Ji Tianqing and quickly poured into his body, strengthening his Dharma body and soul. Ji Tianqing calmly accepted the reward of the heavenly Tao and quickly improved his strength and broke through the realm of martial arts. A quarter of an hour later, the sacred golden light dissipated. His strength and realm had also reached the 5th level of the tribulation transcendence realm. Glancing around the training hall and seeing that everyone was still cheering and discussing, Ji Tianqing didn't stay and directly left the training hall. After returning to the secret room, he summoned the Huanglong Daoist and told him a lot of things in person. After everything was arranged properly, Ji Tianqing took the sword of burial of heaven and left Tianzhu Mountain alone. Swoosh! It was when the sun set. He flew high into the sky and rushed in the direction of the ruins of God. Tianzhu Mountain, the ruins of God, and Baiming Mountain were close to each other and weren't too far away. Ji Tianqing traveled alone at an extremely fast speed, like a shooting star streaking across the horizon. With his current strength, his flying speed was not much slower than a martial sage's. He could fly 200,000 li per day. Unknowingly, 20 days had passed. Ji Tianqing had been rushing with all his might and had not rested at all. On the morning of the 21st day, he finally entered the ruins of God. According to Ku, the mystic realm where the Yin-Yang saints passed away was in the north of the ruins of God. That place is right next to the fallen blood lake and is located in the depths of the ruins of God. The surroundings are extremely dangerous. Ji Tianqing rushed towards the north of the ruins of God as he weighed the pros and cons in his heart. The news of the Yin-Yang secret realm had spread throughout the ruins of God. Many adventure teams and martial arts organizations had entered the ruins of God to search for the Yin-Yang realm. However, he had reason to believe that ordinary people would not be able to pass through the ruins of God and reach the Yin-Yang secret realm. Moreover, ordinary martial artists and experts would not be able to open the secret realm. He was not in a hurry. As he hurried through the ruins of God, he paid attention to his surroundings. 5 days later, Ji Tianqing flew over a towering mountain range. His divine perception suddenly detected a group of martial artists flying across the sky in front of him. They were also heading towards the north of the ruins of God. There were a total of 7 martial artists in the group. The leader's strength had reached the 2nd level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm. The other 6 martial artists were all at the 6th level of the Essence Soul realm and above. Their auras were valiant and fierce. Clearly, this was a group of adventurers. Moreover, they looked very elite and experienced. Ji Tianqing chased after them silently. He remained invisible and secretly eavesdropped on the news. However, he followed them for 4 hours. The adventurers had been rushing at full speed. They remained silent and did not talk. Ji Tianqing lost his patience and decided to show himself. He cast a few spells and knocked the 6 adventurers unconscious. Only the captain of the adventurers was left. He was able to withstand a single blow from him before he was captured. The adventurer team leader was a thin and dark-skinned middle-aged man. His eyes were like an eagle's, sharp and bright. This person had a gloomy and dangerous aura. Clearly, he had been through hundreds of battles and had rich experience. He was very sensible and knew that he could not afford to offend Ji Tianqing. Therefore, he obediently expressed his obedience. Ji Tianqing captured him and asked coldly, "Who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you going?" The adventurer team leader drooped his head and answered with a weary expression, "Senior, we are from the Heavenly Dipper adventure team. I'm Du Tiangang. We came from the Hundred-Gathering City in the south of the Ruins of God. We are preparing to head to the central region of the Ruins of God to investigate a ruin. We are alone and have not done business for several years. We are planning to try our luck." Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and asked in a deep voice, "You are going to the central region of the Ruins of God to investigate a ruin? Aren't you going to the Fallen Blood Lake in the north?" Du Tiangang was taken aback. He said with an odd expression, "Fallen Blood Lake? Senior, do you mean, the legendary Dual Saints mystic realm? You think too highly of us. Although the Dual Saints mystic realm is a huge treasure trove, we don't even have the qualifications to covet the mystic realm. Before we can reach the Fallen Blood Lake, we might be killed by other forces halfway." Ji Tianqing had been monitoring Du Tiangang's divine soul fluctuations. He could confirm that Du Tiangang was not lying. He took a deep look at Du Tiangang and asked, "You, this fellow, have some self-awareness. Oh right, how did you know about the Dual Saints mystic realm? Could it be that the news about the Dual Saints mystic realm has already spread widely?" Du Tiangang hurriedly explained, "I'm sure Senior also knows that Hundred Gathering City is one of the largest adventurer gathering places around the Ruins of God. Our Heavenly Dipper adventure team's base is in Hundred Gathering City. We can be considered a small local snake. I got the news about the Dual Saints mystic realm from the Broken Sky Alliance. In Hundred Gathering City, there is a branch of the Broken Sky Alliance. That is the strongest martial Dao force in the city. My senior brother is an elite of the Broken Sky Alliance and is qualified to know this news. It was also my senior brother who persuaded me not to have any ideas about the Dual Saints mystic realm, so as to avoid attracting a disaster." Ji Tianqing raised his brows and asked, "According to what you said, the Broken Sky Alliance is also interested in the Dual Saints mystic realm?" Du Tiangang revealed a hint of a playful smile and said with a nod, "I'm afraid it's not as simple as just interested. They are determined to get it. I heard from my senior brother that the branch master of the Hundred Gathering City branch personally led the team, leading more than 50 elites to move together. Looking at the Broken Sky Alliance's stance, I'm afraid that the Dual Saints mystic realm is determined to get it." Ji Tianqing also revealed a playful smile and said in a mocking tone, "Determined to get it? With this little manpower, what a fool's dream." Du Tiangang raised his head and glanced at Ji Tianqing. A hint of shock clearly flashed across his eyes, and his expression became even more reverent. He had reason to believe that this white-robed youth dared to look down on the Broken Sky Alliance's strength. He absolutely had unparalleled strength. Thinking so, he was even more glad that he did not resist and told the truth honestly. Chapter 1961. Since Du Tiangang was very sensible, Ji Tianqing did not make things difficult for him. After asking him a few more relevant questions, Lu Yin allowed him to leave. Du Tiangang thanked Lu Yin in fear and trepidation before hurrying to wake up the 6 warriors under him. Ji Tianqing quietly left, traversing mountains and rivers as he continued his journey to the north of the ruins of God. Half a month later, he finally arrived at Fallen Blood Lake. It was evening, and he was standing on a towering mountain peak that was 6,000 meters tall as he looked ahead. There was a vast lake at the foot of the mountain. The lake was at least 10,000 kilometers wide, and it extended from the foot of the mountain to the horizon. The lake water was unfathomably deep, and it had a strange light red color, as if it had been dyed red by blood. A thin mist filled the air above the lake, and it was also a light red color. The setting sun pierced through the mist and shone on the surface of the lake. The surface of the lake was deathly still, and there was no wind or ripple. It was like a pool of stagnant water. The mountains and forests at the edge of the lake were also deathly still, and there were no birds or beasts to be seen. In short, the surrounding area was eerily silent, and it gave off a strange feeling. Ji Tianqing looked down at Fallen Blood Lake and muttered to himself, "Legend has it that Fallen Blood Lake was born in ancient times. At the end of the Great War of the Gods, a powerful and evil demon god was slain by the various martial gods. After the demon god fell, a drop of its origin demon blood fell onto Shenwu continent and into the ruins of God. That drop of demon blood was gradually eroded by wind, frost, rain, and snow until it turned into a pool. After a long period of dilution, it finally turned into a lake of blood. Any life form that comes into contact with the lake of blood will be demonized and lose their rationality, turning into a fallen demon." This was a legend that had been passed down from ancient times, and it was impossible to verify its authenticity. However, Ji Tianqing used his divine sense to investigate, and he could indeed sense that the lake of blood contained traces of demonic qi. Furthermore, his divine sense could extend out for 800 kilometers, and he could even investigate the situation in the depths of the lake. There were a few powerful life auras that seemed to be fluctuating. No wonder the surroundings of the lake are deathly still, and no birds or beasts dare to approach. There are fiendish demons at the Essence Soul Realm and Tribulation Transcendence Realm hidden in the Blood Lake. How would ordinary fiendish beasts dare to approach it? After roughly understanding the situation of the Fallen Blood Lake, Ji Tianqing began to search for the entrance to the Dual Saint's secret realm. In the message that Ji Ku had sent him, he had only said that the entrance to the mystic realm was near the Blood Lake. However, he did not specify its exact location. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to use the invisibility secret technique to remain invisible and continue flying north. He did not fly over the Blood Lake. Instead, he carried out a carpet search along the mountain range at the edge of the Blood Lake. Half an hour later, he had flown over 3,000 li away. He had thoroughly searched the places he had passed by. In a deep canyon, he discovered a group of martial artists. This team of warriors did not look like an adventure team. Judging from their attire, they looked more like a martial arts organization from some divine nation. The leader was a black-robed old man with white hair and beard. His body was tall and sturdy, and he carried a broadsword as wide as a bench on his back. That person's strength had reached the 6th level of the Tribulation Passing Realm. Evidently, he was a martial lord who had been famous for many years. Following closely behind him were 4 middle-aged experts in purple robes. There were 3 men and 1 woman. The strength of these 4 experts was between the 2nd and 4th level of the Tribulation Transcendence Realm. A martial lord leading 4 experts in the Tribulation Transcendence Realm. This force is enough to support a first-rate sect in the three divine nations. They should have accurate information and know where the entrance to the mystic realm is. Ji Tianqing calculated for a moment, then quietly followed behind the group of martial artists and flew north of the Blood Lake. The facts proved that his guess was right. This group of martial artists seemed to have a target long ago. They had been rushing at full speed without stopping or searching the surroundings. In just half an hour, the 5 experts had flown over 4,000 li and arrived at the northern end of the Blood Lake. It was a towering mountain range that lay prone on the ground like a dragon. It stretched from east to west, and no one knew how long it was. The 5 experts flew into the towering mountain range and landed on a steep lone peak. The lone peak seemed quiet, but in fact, there were several experts hidden there. When the 5 experts landed in the forest at the peak of the mountain, 5 figures immediately appeared around them and joined them. The 5 new experts all had the strength of the Tribulation Transcendence realm, and the leader was also a martial lord. The 2 groups of people met and greeted each other. The 2 leading martial lords also gathered together to discuss matters. Ji Tianqing discovered at the close of the 10 Tribulation Transcendence realm experts were basically the same. The emblems and patterns on their lapels were also exactly the same. Obviously, these people belonged to the same martial arts organization. Ji Tianqing hid in the dark and observed, and couldn't help but have a thought in his mind. Could it be that those people are from the Broken Sky Alliance? 10 Tribulation Transcendence realm experts, and 2 of them are martial lords. Other than the Broken Sky Alliance, which sect has such power? Just as he was secretly guessing, the conversation of the 2 martial lords entered his ears. The white-haired old man with a pair of heavy swords on his back said to the other hunchbacked old man, "Old son, you arrived here first, so you should know the situation better, right?" The hunchbacked old man called Old Son stroked his beard and nodded with a smile. "Mu Wujuan, we set off from Baiji City at the same time, but I didn't expect you to be 2 days late. The Vanguard scouts have already found the entrance to the secret realm. It's said that the situation there is complicated, and there are many forces entangled. After the branch leader heard the news, he brought people over last night. He was afraid that you wouldn't be able to find the place, so he told me to stay here and wait for you to come over." Mu Wujuan revealed a trace of a smile, stroked the pair of heavy swords on his back, and said, "The branch leader is considerate. Old son, you're also very kind. After this mission is completed, I'll treat you to a drink when we return." Old Son stroked his beard and nodded with a smile. "I've been waiting for you to say that. Alright, let's not waste any more time and hurry over to support. I reckon that the branch leader has already entered the secret realm and has already started to plunder the treasures, right?" Mu Wujuan revealed a face full of anticipation, and said while rubbing his fists and palms, "Then we have to hurry over even more. Maybe we can still drink some soup. If we're late, then." Old Son laughed loudly, clearly having the same thoughts as him. The 2 of them didn't waste any more time. They called out to the experts under them and quickly left the mountain peak, flying towards the north. After listening to the conversation between Old Son and Mu Wujuan, Ji Tianqing was basically sure that they were from the Broken Heaven Alliance. Thus, he hurriedly followed behind them and turned invisible. Everyone flew across the sky as fast as lightning, crossing mountain range after mountain range. Ji Tianqing could clearly feel that the spiritual qi in this world was 10 times denser than other places. Between the mountains, there was a 5-colored spiritual qi, and above the forest, there was dense green with spiritual qi. After flying for about 3,000 miles, he could see from afar that there was a majestic mountain range in front of him that constantly lit up with colorful lights. Chapter 1962. When they were still 150 kilometers away, Ji Tianqing could already see the 5-colored light illuminating the sky. All kinds of Dharma spells flashed across the dark sky, accompanied by loud noises. Clearly, there was a group of experts fighting in that mountain range, and the commotion was huge. Old Son, Mu Wujuan, and the others seemed to be used to this and did not find it strange at all. The two of them led the 8 experts under their command and flew into the mountain range. Ji Tianqing followed closely behind and soon arrived above the mountain range. There was a flat area with a radius of 100 kilometers at the peak of the mountain. It was full of grass and forests, and the wood spirit qi was extremely rich. A 5-colored light barrier with a radius of 100 kilometers covered the entire area. Ji Tianqing used his divine sense to investigate and found that it was a supreme grade tribulation-level defensive formation. In the depths of the formation, right next to the cliff, there was a gate that was over 30 meters tall, and was golden and blue in color. The oval-shaped door of light had a very strange shape. The door frame was covered with mysterious patterns, and the 2 doors were golden and icy blue respectively. Even though there was a layer of defensive formation, Ji Tianqing could feel that the 2-colored door was emitting a majestic energy fluctuation. More than a dozen purple-robed tribulation passing stage powerhouses were surrounding the light gate, concentrating on using their secret technique. It seemed that they were working together to crack the door of light. Outside the defensive formation, more than 20 tribulation-level experts were guarding, and they all wore the same purple robes. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing immediately understood what was going on. The 30-meter-tall mysterious door of light should be the entrance to the Yin-Yang secret realm. The 40 purple-robed experts inside and outside the formation were all elites of the Broken Sky Alliance. The defensive formation with a radius of 100 kilometers was also set up by the Broken Sky Alliance. The Broken Sky Alliance had occupied this place and were trying to crack the entrance to the secret realm. Ha! No wonder Du Tiangang said that the Broken Sky Alliance was determined to get the secret realm. So that's why. Ji Tianqing sneered and looked up at the sky above the formation. In the dazzling sky, more than 20 tribulation-level experts were fighting fiercely. On one side, there were 12 people wearing the same purple robes, and they were obviously the elites of the Broken Sky Alliance. On the other side, there were only 10 people, but they were all tribulation-level experts. There were men and women in this group, and they were either middle-aged experts or white-haired elders. After observing for a moment, Ji Tianqing was able to determine that these 10 powerhouses were from some sect or force. After all, the techniques and moves of this group of people all had the same shadow. Their Dharma power aura contained the same characteristics. The two sides seemed to have been fighting for a long time. Most of the people were injured and looked quite miserable. However, the 12 elites of the Broken Sky Alliance clearly had the upper hand. The 10 experts of the Broken Sky Alliance would not be defeated soon. Ji Tianqing then looked around the great array and saw that in the nearby sky, there were more than 10 groups of experts in the mountains not far away. Those experts were in groups of 3 to 5. They were clearly separated and kept a distance from each other. They also maintained a vigilant posture. Obviously, they were from different forces. Some had more people, and there were as many as a dozen experts. Some had fewer people, and there were only 3 to 5 people. Ji Tianqing could tell that only a small part of the dozen experts were adventurers, and most of them were from sects and martial arts organizations. The dozen experts were scattered around, watching the battle above the Broken Sky Alliance, and had no intention of joining in. Ji Tianqing looked around and figured out the situation. The entrance to the Broken Sky Alliance's secret realm is here. All the forces have arrived, and they are lurking around. However, it seems that the Broken Sky Alliance is the dominant force, and they have set up a Broken Sky Alliance to seal the entrance and prevent other forces from approaching. The entrance to the Broken Sky Alliance's secret realm is a door of light, which is obviously a saint-level formation. The people of the Broken Sky Alliance are all in the tribulation level, and there are no martial sages present, so they can't open the entrance to the Broken Sky Alliance for the time being. Since that was the case, Ji Tianqing was not in a hurry. He hid in the sky and observed the situation. At this moment, Old Man Sun and Mu Wujuan led 8 elites and landed outside the defensive Broken Sky Alliance. A burly man in golden armor and a dark green cloak walked out of the Broken Sky Alliance. Old Man's son, Mu Wujuan, and the others bowed to this person and said something. The burly man was the Broken Sky Alliance's division leader. He was at the 8th level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm, and his aura was very powerful. He nodded slightly, waved his hand, and gave an order. Old Man's son, Mu Wujuan, and the others did not hesitate and immediately turned to fly into the sky. Everyone took out their Dharma treasures and weapons and joined the battle with a murderous aura. They attacked the 10 sect masters. The experts from the various sects were already overwhelmed and were forced to retreat step by step. After Mu Wujuan and the others joined in the battle, their situation became even more dangerous, and they were quickly defeated. 3 experts were killed on the spot, and the remaining 7 were seriously injured and had to flee in different directions. More than 20 elites of the Heaven-Shattering Alliance began to aggressively pursue him. In the end, another 3 of the 7 sect experts were killed, and only 4 of them managed to escape with their lives. After 100 breaths of time, more than 20 Broken Sky Alliance elites returned to the Broken Sky Alliance. Under the command of the Broken Sky Alliance's division leader, 8 experts participated in breaking the Broken Sky Alliance's division leader, while the remaining dozen stayed outside the Broken Sky Alliance's division leader. Soon, night fell, and the world was covered in darkness. The surroundings of the mountain peak also calmed down. The dozen or so groups of experts watching the battle were all shocked by the Broken Sky Alliance's power and secretly discussed. Ji Tianxing used a secret technique and used his divine sense to eavesdrop on those people's discussions. Suddenly, all kinds of voices entered his mind. Sigh, I didn't expect that even the Overlord Sword Sect's experts would be defeated and end up in such a miserable state. What's so surprising about this? Although the Overlord Sword Sect is a first-rate sect, they only sent 10 experts. That's right. There are too many people from the Broken Sky Alliance. There are 50 people present now, and all of them are at the Tribulation Transcendence realm. Including those who are not present, the number of experts from the Broken Sky Alliance is at least 70 to 80. Almost all the experts of the 100 Gathering City branch have been dispatched. Division leader Qin Haishan is really going all out. He's determined to win. But isn't the Broken Sky Alliance too domineering? They relied on their numbers and set up a formation to seal the entrance of the secret realm. They're not just domineering, they're simply too shameless. They're not giving us any chance at all. Even if they're domineering, what can we do? Are we going to be like the Overlord Sword Sect, provoking the Broken Sky Alliance's dignity and then being killed? I think that people from small sects like us should join forces to deal with the Broken Sky Alliance. There are already more than 20 forces gathered nearby. Our combined numbers are more than the Broken Sky Alliance. Forget it. Everyone came from all corners of the world, from all walks of life. How could they possibly work together? The Broken Sky Alliance knew this, which was why they dared to forcibly occupy the entrance of the secret realm without fear. For 3 whole days, they had not been able to crack the entrance of the secret realm. Chapter 1963. Ji Tianxing listened for a full quarter of an hour. At least several hundred sentences were transmitted into his mind from all directions. The vast majority of people were filled with resentment, very dissatisfied with Broken Heaven Alliance's way of doing things, quite a bit of feeling of having a common enemy. Everyone took an enormous risk, crossing tens of thousands of miles through the divine ruins, and finally arrived at the entrance of the mystic realm with great difficulty. In the end, Broken Heaven Alliance occupied this place, not allowing them to approach at all. Otherwise, they would be killed without mercy. Forget about exploring the mystic realm to search for treasures and seize the 2 saints' treasures and inheritances. They did not even have the qualifications to approach the entrance of the mystic realm. Everyone made a wasted trip. They could see the 2 saints' mystic realm, but could not touch it. How could everyone not be depressed? How could they not vomit blood in anger? However, no matter how much they hated Broken Heaven Alliance, there was nothing they could do. They were alone and weak, and it was chaotic. It was simply impossible to join forces to deal with Broken Heaven Alliance. Many powerhouses discussed for a long time and also did not think of a perfect solution. Witnessing Hegemon Sword Sect's miserable end with their own eyes, no one dared to take the initiative to stand up and wave flags and shout battle cries anymore. However, many powerhouses still harbored fantasies in their hearts. They incomparably hoped that a powerful martial saint would appear, and beat Broken Heaven Alliance to a pulp. Even if that martial saint entered the mystic realm and monopolized the two saints' treasures and inheritances, they also had no complaints. As long as they did not let Broken Heaven Alliance succeed, it was fine. Being able to see Broken Heaven Alliance's people suffer, everyone would also feel gratified, at least they did not make a wasted trip. After a quarter of an hour, Ji Tianqing finished casting the art, and withdrew his divine sense. The corners of his mouth curled into a hint of a playful smile, and he secretly sneered coldly, "Hoo hoo hoo. Broken Heaven Alliance has already aroused public anger, I'm afraid this time it's over." The two saints were powerhouses closest to martial god realm, how could the mystic realm where they passed away in closed-door meditation be so easy to crack? However, Cuckoo said that Ji Xiaolua will also come. I'll observe for a while more, if it doesn't work out, I can only take action. Ji Tianqing was very clear that Broken Heaven Alliance had already sealed this place for 3 days. A full 3 days passed, Broken Heaven Alliance still could not crack the mystic realm's entrance. Even if they were given a few more days, it was still impossible to succeed. Once Ji Xiaolua arrived with the devil race experts, all the experts present would have to step aside. Whether it was the 20 or so scattered factions or the Broken Heaven Alliance, which was the most powerful faction, none of them were a match for Ji Xiaolua. A single Saint Realm expert was enough to crush everyone present. By then, perhaps only Ji Xiaolua would be able to enter the arcane realm and plunder the treasures and inheritances of the two sages. Unknowingly, 6 hours had passed. It was early in the morning. The night was dark and the wind was chilly. The sky above the mountain peak was also covered by boundless dark clouds, making it impossible to see the stars and moonlight. The oppressive atmosphere enveloped everyone. Ji Tianqing was still hiding in the night sky, paying attention to the movements within the defensive formation. Qin Haishan and more than 20 heaven-shattering alliance elites were still busy trying to crack the entrance to the secret realm. Outside the formation, more than 20 elite experts were guarding it tightly. More than 20 experts from different forces were still scattered around the mountain peak and could only watch from afar. During this time, 2 more teams of martial artists arrived. These 2 teams came from different forces, and there were about 10 of them each. Of course, there were only 2 or 3 Tribulation Transcendence experts in the teams, and the others were all in the Essence Soul realm. After these 2 teams arrived, they quickly understood the situation and did not dare to act rashly. At present, it seemed that the Broken Heaven Alliance was the dominant force and would definitely be the biggest winner. No matter how many people the other forces had, they could not compete with the Broken Heaven Alliance. The key point was when the Broken Heaven Alliance would be able to crack the entrance to the secret realm. Just as everyone was feeling helpless and depressed, Ji Tianqing finally appeared. Swoosh! His body lit up with a layer of hazy golden light, and he suddenly appeared in the night sky. He was dressed in a white robe and held a mysterious black sword. His face was handsome and heroic, and his body was tall and slender, exuding a mysterious and powerful aura. When he appeared, more than 10 groups of experts around him all looked at him. Everyone's eyes lit up, and they secretly praised him in their hearts. What a handsome, heroic, and elegant white-robed young master. However, other than this thought, no one had any other thoughts. Many people glanced at him, then looked away and continued to look at the array on the mountain peak. In everyone's opinion, the appearance of this white-robed young master would not change anything, and it would not cause any waves. However, in the next moment, everyone realized that they were wrong. Ji Tianqing actually stepped through the night sky and flew towards the mountain peak at a moderate speed, heading straight for the Broken Heaven Alliance's defensive array. He covered 1,000 feet with each step, and his steps were as steady as a mountain. His aura was as powerful as the vast sea, and he exuded strong confidence. Most importantly, he was acting alone. He was alone with a black sword, and no other companions or helpers. Many experts around the mountain peak were immediately interested and looked at him in surprise. A wave of whispers sounded in the night sky. What is that guy trying to do? Is he going to challenge the Broken Heaven Alliance? Is he crazy? He's so young, but he has such an extraordinary aura. He actually dares to come here alone, so he must be extraordinary. So what if he's strong? There are at least 80 experts who died at the hands of the Broken Heaven Alliance, if not 100. Sigh, he's still young and impetuous, and can't keep his composure. Such a reckless action won't accomplish anything great. Just as everyone was secretly discussing, Ji Tianqing had already flown to the mountain peak. He stopped about 10 miles away from the defensive array, and stood calmly in the night sky. 5 kilometers away, the elites of the Heaven-Shattering Alliance who were guarding the Great Formation immediately cast wary gazes at him. Mu Wujuan frowned, and his face darkened. He led 2 purple-robed elites and flew towards Ji Tianqing. Kid, this place has been expropriated by the Broken Heaven Alliance. If you don't want to die, scram. As his voice fell, Mu Wujuan stopped 3,000 feet away from Ji Tianqing. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, and looked at Ji Tianqing with an arrogant expression. The 2 purple-robed elites drew their swords and sabers, revealing strong killing intent towards Ji Tianqing. Facing the three's demonstration, Ji Tianqing was not angry, and said expressionlessly, "You don't have the right to talk to me, let Qin Haishan come see me." His voice was calm and indifferent, but it was full of energy and contained an unquestionable domineering aura. His voice spread out, and like a stone thrown into a lake, it stirred up layers of ripples. The dozen or so experts revealed shocked expressions, and looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. Mu Wujuan and the 2 purple-robed elites were stunned, thinking that they had heard wrongly. The 3 quickly reacted, and revealed cold killing intent, and cursed angrily. "Kid, you're courting death. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth, you're tired of living. Kill him." Following Mu Wujuan's order, the 2 purple-robed elites charged towards Ji Tianqing with their swords and sabers. Whoosh whoosh. Chapter 1964. Facing the pincer attack of 2 tribulation stage powerhouses, Ji Tianqing was still calm and collected. He didn't retreat half a step. Instead, he casually raised his right hand and sent out a palm strike. Heavenly Dragon Palm. A ball of dazzling silver flame shot out of his palm. Whoosh! That ball of violent star divine fire immediately condensed into a 300-meter-long silver flame dragon and shot towards the 2 elite powerhouses. At that moment, the silver flame dragon streaked across the night sky and illuminated a radius of several hundred miles. The resplendent silver light far surpassed the stars and moonlight. Bam! With a muffled explosion, a 5-colored brilliance burst out and scattered in the night sky. The attacks of the 2 elite powerhouses were directly defeated by the silver flame dragon and fell apart. Then, the silver flame dragon hit the 2 elite powerhouses. Both of them spat out blood and flew backwards with their bodies bent, smashing into the colorful defensive formation. Thump! Thump! The 2 fell to the ground with a slight muffled sound and then fainted. However, these 2 muffled sounds were like 2 heavy hammers that fiercely struck everyone's hearts. Lord Mu Wujuan's expression changed on the spot. His eyes were filled with shock and anger. The dozen or so powerhouses watching the battle were also stunned. All of them revealed astonished expressions. No one dared to believe that this reckless and ignorant white-robed young master was actually this strong. A light palm strike was able to heavily injure two heaven-shattering alliance elites and knock them unconscious. What kind of strength was this? Perhaps only the heaven-shattering alliance's branch leader, Qin Haishan, had such ability. At the thought of this, many powerhouses were filled with excitement. Their hearts were filled with anticipation and fantasy. All kinds of discussions and exclamations rose one after another. I can't believe that guy's strength is so terrifying. No wonder he could come to Fallen Blood Lake alone and even dare to challenge the heaven-shattering alliance. We all misjudged him. Although this kid is young, his strength is unfathomable. If he can successfully challenge the heaven-shattering alliance, then we'll have a chance to share the spoils. Everyone, don't be too optimistic. He only casually took care of 2 small fries. The Broken Heaven Alliance has more than a dozen martial monarchs in Qin Haishan, he can't possibly succeed. For a time, many experts had different opinions. At this moment, Mu Wujuan could no longer hold back his anger and pulled out the 2 swords on his back. Brat, you dare to challenge our Broken Sky Alliance? You must be tired of living. Let me meet you. I want to see how capable you are. As he roared, Mu Wujun's entire body burst into flames as he brandished his pair of broadswords and slashed out 18 times at Ji Tianqing. Swish! Swish! 18 flaming sword lights that were hundreds of meters long burst forth with destructive power and slashed toward Ji Tianqing. Hundreds of miles of the night sky was illuminated, and the violent and scorching heat waves forced the surrounding powerhouses to retreat. Ji Tianqing still stood in place, not retreating even half a step. He still did not draw his sword. Holding the sword of burial of heaven in her left hand, she raised her right hand and punched out. Star-shattering fist. A silver fist the size of a house smashed toward Mu Wujuan with the power of divine fire that could burn heaven and earth. Kaboom! With a shocking explosion, the 18 flaming swords were all shattered by the silver fist, splashing out a rain of fire. The silver fist's power and speed did not decrease in the slightest as it instantly hit Mu Wujuan. Bam! Mu Wujuan did not have time to dodge before he was sent flying. While he was still in the air, he opened his mouth and spat out a jet of dark red blood. Blood spurted out of his 7 orifices, his chest deeply caved in, and his entire body was twisted out of shape. After flying 10 miles away, he crashed into the defensive formation with a loud thud. His head tilted to one side, and he fainted. Such a result instantly left everyone dumbfounded. There was complete silence around the mountain peak. Not a single sound could be heard. Whether it was the people of the Broken Sky Alliance or the powerhouses of the various factions, they all stared at Ji Tianqing with their mouths agape. They were so shocked that they could not speak. It was one thing for the 2 elites of the Broken Sky Alliance to be knocked unconscious by him. But Mu Wujuan was a martial lord who had been famous for many years, a powerhouse in the 6th stage of the tribulation stage. He was also defeated by a single punch and knocked unconscious. At this moment, the same thought appeared in everyone's mind. How strong is that white-robed young master? Even Qin Haishan might not be able to do this, could he be a martial saint powerhouse? Thinking of this, the people of the Broken Sky Alliance were filled with worry as they stared at Ji Tianqing with hostility. The powerhouses of the 20 factions were wild with joy, their hearts filled with excitement and anticipation. Many people could not help but cheer and applaud Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing, who was in the night sky, still looked indifferent. That domineering and invincible scene just now was shocking to everyone. To him, it was just a matter of a snap of his fingers. He looked coldly at the defensive formation and said in a deep voice, "I'll say it one last time, tell Qin Haishan to come out and meet me." His deep and cold voice reverberated in the night sky, shaking everyone's hearts. The powerhouses of the various factions only felt that Ji Tianqing was incomparably domineering and were in awe of him. The people of the Broken Sky Alliance were filled with humiliation and righteous indignation. Inside the defensive formation, Qin Haishan, who was dressed in golden armor, stood majestically in the middle of the formation and stared coldly at Ji Tianqing. He had noticed Ji Tianqing when he appeared. However, he did not speak and only stared sharply at Ji Tianqing. He was the honorable division leader of the Broken Sky Alliance. How could he tolerate Ji Tianqing's arrogance in front of him? If he really went out to meet him, wouldn't he lose all face? Where would the Broken Sky Alliance's face go? At this moment, seeing the powerhouses of the various factions cheering, his face became even more gloomy. Kill him. He swung his large cloak and waved his hand to give the order. The 20 or so elite powerhouses guarding outside the formation immediately took out their Dharma treasures and weapons. Everyone roared and rushed over, waving their Dharma treasures and weapons as they attacked Ji Tianqing. Only death awaited those who dared to provoke the Broken Sky Alliance. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The 20 or so powerhouses spread out and released their powerful Dharma spells. The sky was filled with Dharma spells and hundreds of sword and saber lights slashed down from the sky toward Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing was surrounded by so many powerhouses, but he did not panic in the face of danger. His body was still full of vigor. Clang! He finally drew the sword of burial of heaven. With his left hand behind his back, he waved the sacred sword with his right hand and slashed out a dazzling sword light. Big Dipper Sword. Shattering 7 stars with one strike. In that instant, the sword of burial of heaven released 49 silver sword lights, arranged in the Big Dipper sword formation and spread out in all directions. Bam 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 bam. The 300-meter-long silver sword lights collided with the Dharma spells and caused an earth-shaking explosion that spread for hundreds of kilometers. All the sword lights and Dharma spells collapsed in an instant, turning into billions of light fragments that scattered in the night sky. The 20 or so elite powerhouses were all hit by the silver sword lights and were sent flying with blood spurting out of their bodies. Chapter 1965. Plop. Plop. More than 20 experts of the Broken Sky Alliance fell on the mountain peak in a sorry state, making muffled sounds. Almost everyone was covered in blood. They had at least 6 or 7 sword wounds, and their wounds were charred black. The ordinary elite experts were unable to move after falling to the ground. They either fainted or struggled on the ground and screamed. Only the 7 martial monarchs in the 5th and 6th stages of the Tribulation Transcendence realm could still remain conscious. They struggled to stand up with their injuries. Seeing this scene, the experts around the mountain peak all revealed looks of shock. Many people opened their mouths silently and widened their eyes in shock. After a long time, the crowd burst out in exclamations. Heavens! That white-robed young master's strength is actually so strong. This is too terrifying. This is definitely not something a tribulation stage expert can do. He must be a martial saint. One person facing more than 20 tribulation stage experts, and he could even seriously injure everyone with one move. If he wasn't a martial saint expert, I would have killed myself here. No wonder he was so confident and dared to challenge the Broken Sky Alliance alone. No wonder he clamored and called out Qin Haishan's name. No wonder his aura is as vast as the heavens and earth, making it impossible for people to see through him. Ha ha ha. The Broken Sky Alliance is too domineering. Finally, a martial saint expert is going to teach them a lesson. Tonight, the Broken Sky Alliance has fallen. This is so satisfying. The experts of more than 20 forces were all inexplicably excited as they discussed excitedly. At this moment, there was another change on the mountain peak. More than 10 purple-robed elites were lying on the grass in disorder. The remaining 7 martial lords tenaciously picked up their swords and sabers, and their bodies lit up with the brilliance of magic power. For the Broken Sky Alliance. For our honor. For branch leader Qin. We would rather die than submit. Kill. Angry shouts rang out, containing a firm and unyielding will. The 7 martial lords brandished their weapons again and charged at Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety. Soon, they arrived in front of Ji Tianqing, and were only 1,000 feet away from him. Another round of fierce battle was about to break out. But at this moment, a cold angry shout came from the defensive formation. "Stop!" This dignified voice naturally came from Qin Haishan's mouth. When the 7 martial lords heard the order, they all stopped in unison and stopped their attacks. Then, everyone's eyes gathered on Qin Haishan. Qin Haishan's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot, and his eyes were as cold as ice. He stepped out of the defensive formation and came to the night sky outside the formation. He stood 10,000 feet away from Ji Tianqing. He looked at Ji Tianqing with a complex expression and asked in a low and deep voice, "You are so young and yet you possess such terrifying strength. I truly admire you. However, our Broken Sky Alliance has no enmity with you, so why would you kill us?" Although Qin Haishan was furious and wanted nothing more than to tear Ji Tianqing into pieces. However, as the branch leader, he was in charge of hundreds of tribulation stage powerhouses. He was extremely scheming and shrewd. He suppressed his anger and questioned Ji Tianqing sternly in the name of the heaven-shattering alliance. Ji Tianqing looked at him expressionlessly and said calmly, "That's right, we have no enmity with you. As for killing them, that's not the case. Your subordinates were only knocked unconscious. If I really wanted to kill them, they would have been corpses long ago." Qin Haishan was startled for a moment. He secretly released his divine sense to cover the mountain peak and checked everyone's injuries. The situation was just as Ji Tianqing said. More than 20 powerhouses were seriously injured, and most of them were knocked unconscious. However, no one died. This result showed that the other party did not have any killing intent, and it was enough to prove that the other party's strength was unfathomable. It was easy to kill someone, but it was more difficult to knock someone unconscious without killing them. Qin Haishan understood this and became more and more afraid of Ji Tianqing. He frowned and asked in a low voice, "Then why are you enemies with our Broken Sky Alliance?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked in a contemptuous tone, "Enemies with the Broken Sky Alliance? If I really had such intentions, the Broken Sky Alliance would have ceased to exist long ago. You!" Qin Haishan was so angry that his face turned green. He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Young man, you really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. My subordinates and I are just a branch in Baiji City. The Broken Sky Alliance has 100,000 powerhouses and many martial sages. Even a martial god would not dare to underestimate us." Before he could finish, Ji Tianqing grinned coldly and said, "Ha ha ha. Even if Wu Duantian were here, he would not dare to be presumptuous in front of me, and he would not dare to boast like you." Qin Haishan's body stiffened when he heard the 3 words Wu Duantian. His eyes stared deadly at Ji Tianqing, revealing deep respect and fear. For a moment, he was speechless. This was because Wu Duantian was the founder of the Broken Sky Alliance. After the Yin-Yang Saints and Kenshin, he was known as the most powerful martial sage and was the closest to becoming a martial god. For almost 1,000 years, Wu Duantian had handed over the affairs of the alliance to a few elders while he cultivated in seclusion and did not show himself. There were rumors that Wu Duantian had reached the limit of a martial sage and was trying to break through to the martial god realm. There were even rumors that Wu Duantian had broken through the mysteries of heaven and was half a step into the martial god realm. All in all, Wu Duantian was an absolute legend in the Shenwu continent. His reputation was second only to the Yin-Yang Saints. Qin Haishan was extremely respectful towards alliance leader Wu Duantian. The white-robed youth in front of him dared to call out Wu Duantian's name directly and even said such arrogant words. Qin Haishan was naturally furious and only wanted to hack this person to death for blaspheming the alliance leader. However, Qin Haishan was not stupid. He could see that Ji Tianqing was not lying. His gaze, aura and spirit undulations were all normal. This meant that Ji Tianqing knew Wu Duantian. Moreover, the relationship between the two of them was somewhat subtle. Qin Haishan frowned and quickly weighed the pros and cons in his heart. He was not a hothead, so he would not fly into a rage and fight Ji Tianqing. He did not need to guess to know the result. But for him to put down his pride and grovel in front of Ji Tianqing? That was not realistic. After all, there were so many powerhouses watching, and he could not afford to lose face. For a moment, Qin Haishan was silent with a complicated expression, not knowing how to respond. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing was the first to speak and break the awkwardness. Qin Haishan, your status is too low to know about the matters between me and Wu Tuantian. You only need to know that I am not here to kill you, but to save you. Qin Haishan was stunned for a moment and revealed a puzzled expression. He subconsciously asked, Senior, may I ask, what do you mean by this? His attitude towards Ji Tianqing had quietly changed. Chapter 1966. Qin Haishan's change in attitude shocked everyone. 10 breaths ago, he was still the high and mighty division leader of the Broken Sky Alliance. But now, he was extremely respectful to Ji Tianqing. Not only were the experts around the mountain dumbfounded, but even the 20 or so elites of the heaven-shattering alliance in the defensive formation were also stunned. However, no one dared to laugh at Qin Haishan, and no one would think that he was spineless. Facing a mysterious martial saint expert who was on par with Wu Tuantian, no one dared to act rashly. Ji Tianqing looked at Qin Haishan and said calmly, although the Broken Sky Alliance is powerful, a tall tree attracts the wind. You'll definitely attract the hatred of everyone by blocking the entrance of the secret realm. In a short period of time, you can rely on your numbers to suppress the experts. However, if you're careless in the slightest, then the various powers will definitely seize the opportunity to counterattack and kick you while you're down, causing your death. Qin Haishan fell silent when he heard this. He understood the logic behind it. However, he was too confident that no force could challenge the Broken Sky Alliance, so he dared to be fearless. The experts around the mountain all agreed with Ji Tianqing's words. Some people nodded repeatedly, some echoed loudly, and some even applauded and flattered Ji Tianqing. Qin Haishan's expression became more and more ugly, and he was deeply worried. Previously, he had 50 elites under his command, and was not afraid of the other forces. Now, half of the elites were severely injured. He could not help but worry that the experts of the other forces might join forces to deal with him. Therefore, he cupped his hands towards Ji Tianqing and asked, Senior, I understand what you're saying, but how do you plan to save me? Ji Tianqing said without changing his expression, it's very simple. You should understand the principle of letting things go rather than blocking them, right? You've occupied the entrance of the secret realm, and 3 days have passed, but you haven't been able to break the formation at the entrance. Instead, you've angered everyone. Instead of that, why don't you gather all the capable people and join forces to break the formation? Whoever can break the formation will be qualified to enter the secret realm. This. Qin Haishan instantly fell into hesitation, and he frowned as he weighed the pros and cons. The experts around the mountain all cheered excitedly, all of them cheering in agreement. Yes, this senior is absolutely right. That's exactly what we think. This senior is the one who is reasonable. As expected of a senior expert. Not only did he not bully the weak, he even upheld justice for us. We didn't come here in vain this time. To be able to see such a graceful and outstanding senior, this trip was not in vain. We all agree with this senior's suggestion. Everyone has gone through so much to come here. Everyone should have a chance to try it. That's right. As long as you let us try to break the formation, regardless of whether we can enter the secret realm or not, we have no complaints. The experts of the various forces were very astute and hurriedly took advantage of the situation to kick up a fuss. They might not have much respect for Ji Tianqing. However, at this juncture, they could only support Ji Tianqing and use his name as a shield. Qin Haishan heard the shouts of various experts, and under the pressure of Ji Tianqing, he had no choice but to nod and agree. All right. Since Senior and the leader of our alliance are old friends, I will listen to Senior's advice. He cupped his fists at Ji Tianqing and used his divine sense to ask, Senior, there are too many people here. It is inconvenient for you to reveal your identity. I can understand. However, I have to bear a great responsibility for making this decision. I hope that Senior can take out a token or some evidence to prove that you are friends with the leader. After saying that, he was afraid of angering Ji Tianqing and hurriedly explained, of course, Senior, please don't misunderstand. It's not that I don't believe you. I just need an explanation. If the leader asks about it in the future, I can answer to him. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly to show that he understood. He frowned and pondered for a moment before saying, remember my appearance and attire. If Wu Duantian asks about it in the future, just tell him the truth. If he asks, you only need to say one sentence, and he will understand. What sentence? Qin Haishan looked expectant. Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with a strange smile and said calmly, holy shit, I missed again. Qin Haishan was stunned and his eyes widened in shock. At that moment, he thought that he had heard wrongly and was hallucinating. If it wasn't for Ji Tianqing's mysterious background and powerful strength, he really wanted to slap Ji Tianqing and make him say it again. However, this thought flashed in his mind and he did not dare to stay. After being stunned for a while, he asked hesitantly, Senior, are you joking with me? Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows as a formless pressure burst out from his body, pressing down on him like an avalanche. Do I look like I'm joking with you? Qin Haishan was shocked by his pressure and his whole body fell into an ice cellar. He bowed in fear and said, Senior, please calm down. I have offended you. In the future, if the alliance leader asks, I will tell you the truth. Ji Tianqing nodded, showing an expression that said, this child is worth teaching. Qin Haishan didn't dare to talk to him anymore. He quickly flew up into the sky, looked around, and announced with a voice as loud as a bell, heroes from all walks of life, I, Qin Haishan, am here to announce something. According to this senior's suggestion, I have decided to allow everyone to recommend themselves to break the entrance of the Mystery Land with the Alliance. However, in order to save everyone's time, only powerhouses who are above the third stage of the Tribulation Crossing realm and who are proficient in array formations are qualified to try. In addition, out of respect for this senior, he will try to break the array formation first. Those who are qualified to try to break the array formation can register with Deacon Wu. As his voice spread in the night sky, the powerhouses of more than 20 forces started to whisper to each other. Everyone knew that Qin Haishan was willing to compromise because of Ji Tianqing. It was not easy for him to do so. Therefore, everyone could accept Qin Haishan's request and had no objections. 10 powerhouses who met the conditions quickly flew out and came to the peak of the mountain. A tall and thin old man with white hair and beard flew out from the defensive array formation. This person was Deacon Wu, Qin Haishan's subordinate. He came outside the defensive array formation and registered the 10 powerhouses. Qin Haishan led Ji Tianqing and flew into the defensive array formation. Senior, please go first. Ji Tianqing did not stand on ceremony. He swaggered into the defensive array formation and flew towards the Mystery Land's entrance first. Qin Haishan followed behind him. He was depressed and nervous, but he could only maintain a respectful attitude. When Ji Tianqing flew to the Mystery Land's entrance and landed under the dual-colored light door, more than 20 powerhouses of the Broken Heaven Alliance consciously retreated. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.